business and politics and everything that happens to keep our province running smoothly. To my right, we have local entrepreneur, the one and only, an educator, Josh Taylor. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Doing great.
Glad to see you. And we have the CEO of the St. John's Board of Trade, the one and only Nancy Healy.
Good evening.
Thanks for being here. And of course, from Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, CEO Craig Pollock. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. I'm feeling a bit nervous by hanging out with all these heavy hitters here. I want to turn it over to you. Oh, yeah, we'll figure that out over the next few hours, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I want to ask you, what are you looking forward to over the next few hours as all the things sort of roll through?
I'm looking forward to all the elections being done. I mean, it seems like it's been a year of elections. I think there's going to be some surprising results in Newfoundland. I think mostly we kind of feel that the Liberals are going to do very well. Then I'm going to very quickly shift towards, I'm going to keep my eye on Quebec, then the GTA, because there's like 50 seats up there. For grabs, and then I think it'll all go right down to the wire, and we'll have to look at it. Can the Liberals keep government in BC?
Thank you very much. Nancy, what are your thoughts leading into tonight?
Well, I think for most of Newfoundland and Labrador that you're going to see a Liberal sweep, but St. John's East is probably the most interesting riding that we're looking at in the two previous elections. Jack Harris won with about 70% of the vote, and he lost to Nick Whalen in the last election by 600 votes. So did Nick Whalen ride in on Justin Trudeau's coattails, and what's going to happen with Jack Harris tonight and the rise of Jagmeet Singh? So that'll be really interesting to see.
Likewise. Craig, what are your beats? What do you think?
I'm really interested in seeing what happens with voter turnout. I think it's a really good indicator whether people are engaged. I think for our province, this was a bit of a snoozer of a federal election. It didn't really seem to catch a lot of steam, didn't seem to ignite anything with the general public. And I want to see if that translates into how many people showed up to cast their ballot.
Thank you so much, guys. I look forward to hanging out over the next few hours. Until then, Jason, it's back to you.
So some talk there about maybe it's not as exciting as we might expect it to be, but it is an election. It is a big country. We are only the beginning of it. So a lot of stuff could happen, ladies and gentlemen, after all of us find ourselves in bed tonight. So, of course, we are based in St. John's, but we care about the rest of the province very deeply, and we've got people stationed across there. So we're going to do some live remote hits throughout the evening. So let me introduce you to some of our correspondents who are going to be around today. We have Mitchell Drydak. Mitchell is over at the headquarters for Mr. Jack Harris. Mitchell, how are you doing, sir?
Hey there, Jason. So it's looking pretty quiet right now. Not too much happening, but on the plus side, we do have a Ziggy Peelgood's truck outside, so can't complain.
Mitchell, I fully expect to see you a little later on as we close things down with some gravy down the side of your face and hopefully something in your back pocket for me. Thank you very much, Mitchell. More to come from Mitchell a little bit later on. Now, towards the central part of our beautiful province, of course, Scott Sims, when he heads up to his HQ, we will have some time to see what's going on along there. But for now, out on the West Coast in Corner Brook, our very own Jacqueline Wong is in Goody Hutchings headquarters. And Jacqueline, how are things looking where you are?
Thank you, Jason. We're at Liberal Party headquarters in Corner Brook. Behind me, there is a campaign team. They're excited and waiting for the results from these elections. We will update you more when we have more information from here.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Ladies and gentlemen, a whole bunch coming up tonight. There's a lot to be said over the next 2 hours, minus the little bit you just saw. We will be right back after this break.
Mom, you said it's played again.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are. Welcome to The Experience, O'Reilly's Irish Newfoundland Pub, a place to meet your friends, have a bite, and move your feet to live music every night. A rollicking good time that will dance in your heart for years to come.
Spirit of Newfoundland has been delivering laughter, love, music, and magic.
From our all-star cast and crew, bringing you the best dining and entertainment experience all year round.
Spirit of Newfoundland.
Proud sponsors of Rogers TV.
When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is put on my yarn.
Jaylen's been able to have the prosthetics and have the support that she needs because of the people who donate to the war amps.
My arm helps me to pick flowers.
She can do things on her own. She doesn't need someone else to do it for her.
I love all the pretty colors of flowers, but yellow's my favorite color.
So welcome back to The Local Results. Your host, Jason Piercey, here with any results that we have so far. Of course, polls closed a short time ago at 8:30. Not a whole lot to report just yet, but these are the numbers that we have as of now. On the Avalon, nothing in of the 213 polls that we're expecting. And as we move further across the province, we'll see more. If you have any questions, you want to tweet to us, you can find us on Facebook at RogersTV St. John's or on Twitter at RogersTV St. John's. Perhaps if you have some questions for our panel of experts or for myself or any of the few guests that I'll have in this evening. Bonavista, Buren, Trinity, nothing reported just yet. Of course, polls just closing a few moments ago. We would love to hear from you, see what questions you have. Again, on Facebook at RogersTV St. John's or Twitter at RogersTV St. John's. Same thing, the 231 polls across Coast of Bays, Central, and Notre Dame. Nothing reported just yet, but we do have some words from our panel of experts on maybe some topics that should be of influence later tonight. Donnie?
Thanks so much, Jason. So guys, I want to open this up for the next few minutes and have a little chat about business from the federal lens. And Nancy, I'd like to start with you, if you would like.
Sure.
Thanks so much.
Well, you know, one of the things that we were looking for, and I know it's on the top of everybody's mind, was changes to the Tax Act. But, you know, a few years ago, there were some proposed changes made, and it really highlighted that we haven't looked at the income tax since about 1970, 1971. So, and a lot has changed in the world in that length of time, you know, the way of e-commerce and business across borders and the like. And that's just one example. And so, but for small business, the Tax Act is huge and complicated for them, and it really needs to be made a lot simpler. So that we were looking for a review of the entire Tax Act. And there was only one party that we could see that was committed to that, which was the Green Party, interestingly enough. So that's one of the big issues. And, you know, 93% of Canadians work in small businesses, you know, small and medium-sized enterprises. Here in Newfoundland, most of them work in really small businesses, less than 10 employees. So, you know, we all should really care about the business issues and the challenges that they have. Interprovincial trade is another big issue. We can't move our beer from one province to the next. We can't move our chocolate, or, you know, the trucking standards are completely different. We're one big country. We can move our goods and our labor into Europe more than we can move it in across the country. So those are some of the things that we're looking to get resolved.
Thank you so much. And Josh, I'll ask you to pick up on that plan.
Yeah, and as well as simplifying our tax code and looking at some opportunities there to boost that sector, I think, because you're seeing a lot of people are very nervous to invest. We've also got a lot of talk about carbon taxation, which I think most Canadians believe that we have to do something to deal with climate change. But people are worried about what's the regulatory burden, how's it going to hit consumer confidence, and what's going to be the actual impact on the economy, specifically for small business.
I'll turn it over to you, Craig. When it comes to the municipal front of small business and what that means under your umbrella, what are you thinking about tonight?
I'm thinking about infrastructure spending, to be honest. A lot of the small businesses in our province, a lot of the big businesses in our provinces depend on really effective, up-to-date, functioning municipal services. Roads, water, sewer, all that kind of stuff. It's the sort of the ugly, not so flashy stuff that keeps the society moving and keeps goods moving and keeps trade happening. And we really need a big influx of money into that. At the national level, we've been talking about doubling the gas tax, which is, for Newfoundland and Labrador, that's a $30 million boost to the economy. Something like 1.6% spin-off or 60% spin-off from that kind of spending. So that's the kind of thing we were looking for from the parties this year.
Thank you so much. I want to flip it over to the next little point of chat. When I say ABC, I'm sure we all have memories to deal with. Josh, I'm going to ask you about your lens of how the PCs are continually haunted by ABC.
Yeah, and I think you said it right there when you said the PCs. I mean, the ABC campaign goes right back to Danny Williams and the rift with Stephen Harper, and he was very successful, if you remember before, in his fight with the Liberal government in the Atlantic Accord. So he started that rift and created a landslide. But that's held on. There's still a legacy there. And it's not necessarily based around the same issues. I think the Conservative Party of Canada is a little out of step, specifically socially, with where Newfoundlanders are. If you talk to them, there is quite a difference. And you saw the PCs in the provincial election make significant gains against the provincial Liberals. But that hasn't translated into any significant boost for the Conservatives. They haven't been able to attract star candidates yet. So it's very unfortunate that we live in a two-party system. And it seems like Newfoundland can't get anyone on the blue team.
What do you think, Nancy?
Yeah, so I think, it's amazing that the legacy of that ABC campaign has lasted that long, but also you have combined with that the shift in the, here in Newfoundland, it's and Labrador, it's the Progressive Conservative Party, and the rest of the country, we have the Conservative Party, and that, coming out of the Canadian Alliance and the Reform Party and also, that just never took hold here in Newfoundland and Labrador. They are never able to regain, the strong days of when John Crosbie and Jim McGraw and the likes were in government here. So it's amazing, though, 10, 11 years since that ABC campaign, and it is still having its impact today.
It's still being felt very much, and I think it's partially due to the fact that Newfoundland and Labradorians they don't relate to Scheer. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what's coming next, and I think that perhaps you would have seen a different field, leadership field, if the Conservative leadership had happened a year later, when all of the SNC's Lavalin scandal had broken. But Scheer is pretty much a Western Canadian, and he hasn't resonated here.
Thank you guys so much. Jason, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you very much, Donnie, and our panel of experts. Just a little glimpse there as to what you can expect from them. And also now a little glimpse as to what you can expect from me as I'm joined with Hannah Baker. Hannah, first-time voter in a federal election, also a climate change advocate, somewhat integral in the recent protests up at our local Confederation building. Here to talk a little bit maybe about how important climate change is, how much locally we sort of want that to be heard and a voice from government, hear locally from it, and also a little bit about maybe the impact that the younger voter can have in this upcoming election.
Of course, yeah. It's really hard to address climate action in the province, especially since we are so disconnected from Canada as a province. We only just joined the Confederation 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Not 50 years ago.
70
years ago.
Yeah.
So we are not really connected to the mainland. We can't have the same resources as them. We don't have the same access. Along with that, the voices of the youth aren't being heard on this island.
So are you of the opinion that the conversation surrounding climate change is more likely spearheaded by the younger generations? So are those the people who have really valuable things to say? They're the people who can lead that charge, but the downside to that being that there's less younger voter turnout? Is that sort of what you're leaning towards?
Yeah, climate change has definitely become a really big issue among the youth, especially with the uprising of Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future movement, which me and a bunch of young Newfoundlanders are a part of. The rise in climate action has definitely been great, but voter turnout hasn't been great in the past. So luckily, we're hoping this election more youth will be coming out to the polls, and I think I've seen it. I've seen so many people on social media today saying, I voted, I voted, I voted. So it's really exciting to see that and to know that our actions are being voiced by the youth.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's talk about the size of our province, the number of ridings that we have, what impact we can have on a national level when it comes to the things that we want to discuss. But I mean, if we have the solid representation, the way that a democracy should work here locally, then we're voting for the local voice to a degree, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't ask you on live television to tell people who that you think that they should go vote for, but do you have an idea in your head of what makes the most sense for you as an individual and somebody who cares deeply about climate change?
Yeah, it was really hard picking out my party, if I'm honest. It's hard to figure out, you know, who represents my values most, and, you know, who's more likely to even become the local MP to go to the House of Parliament. So I think that was also a struggle, and I think a lot of people are pushing for strategic voting, especially since there's a lot of talk around the Liberal and NDP coalition.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that as like as a topic? So, is that what you think people in your generation, a younger voter, like being a first time? I understand. I mean, at your age, you likely voted in the recent provincial election, but is that what you think? The younger generation who are in their first or second time voting around for a federal election, they're thinking like, do I need to be strategic about this?
I definitely think young people are doing that just because they're trying to align their values with what's going to be the most realistic outcome. It's really hard for youth to see that, you know, their vote matters when it's not being shown, and I think that by having the option of voting strategically, it shows them like, hey, here's a way that your vote can actually matter because it's going towards a larger party, whereas it actually means you're not really practicing democracy.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to put it. Thank you very much, Hannah. Donnie, panel, the idea of that strategic voting, the idea that you can make a larger impact by getting your head around not necessarily the party that or your local person that you want to be represented by, but the larger movement. Is this going to play a particularly large role today, I feel?
Great question, and thank you so much. And P.S. guys, if you're home on the computers, please tweet us out any questions you want for the panel for us to discuss over the next couple of hours. I'll turn it over to you. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think you're going to see a lot of strategic voting. In Newfoundland and Labrador, I think you'll see people pick perhaps conservative candidates outside of the Avalon where maybe they're disenfranchised with the Liberals, notably thinking down in Bonavista where they had the surf clam issue. And in the city, I think you'll see a lot of people who are perhaps conservative who might go with Jack Layton because they don't want to see a Liberal sweep.
Yeah, it would be interesting if we had proportional representation, then, you know, strategic voting would work a little bit better. But in our first past the post system, it really does make it a challenge to do strategic voting. You got to hope that there's a block of other people who are going to vote the way that you are. You know, the Greens have seen a surge in their popular support right across the country. You know, to get up to, you know, around the 10-12% mark, and so much so that their leader was able to participate in the debates, which I remember in the last election that was a big issue, and that was, you know, it was a no-brainer this time around. But so it does make it a challenge as to how well one can strategically vote if we don't have proportional representation.
And I haven't seen a lot of evidence yet, to be quite honest, that strategic voting works. Whether it can happen on the magnitude to make a real difference. I think the best strategy is voting, and I'm so happy to hear young people talking about voting, because so many people who are upset with the system, and rightly so upset with this system, are just constantly working around and outside the system, pulling pieces off, trying to work around it, and that's fine. That's part of democracy, you know, work to change the system. But when the elections come along, vote as well. It's not mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can work to change the system, and you can still vote. It's still a really important thing. And of course, the vote is only one part of being part of a democracy. Once the government is formed, get in there. Go to committees. Call your MP. Be a pain, and get your voice heard. You know?
Shake things up. You know, it's interesting that the strategic voting piece came up because you saw a bit with the Conservative Party late in the election as they were starting to do very well and they saw the NDP surge. They said, go with us or else you'll get a Liberal and NDP coalition. But interestingly enough, the Liberals said, oh, if you don't if you vote NDP, then all of a sudden the Conservatives get in. And it's quite rich that they did that because they ran last time on bringing in proportional representation. They didn't. So it highlights one of the biggest weaknesses from their last election win.
It makes my brain hurt after a while. It really does. Just too late. It's like chess. I can't play chess. I can't strategically vote.
That's true.
I will keep it back on the moment of climate change. Indeed, it was and continues to be a very huge subject federally, of course, and here at home based on the interview that we just had. But how do you reconcile that with Newfoundland and Labrador's continued dependence on oil and gas? Nancy?
Certainly is a dichotomy, isn't it, that we have such a big dependence on oil and gas. But, you know, one of the things I find fascinating is that about 89% of the world's oil and gas comes from countries that do not have environmental regulations, do not believe in the rule of law, treat women terribly. You know, countries like Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Russia. And here in Canada, you know, we do have rule of law. We do consult with Indigenous communities when we want to bring about oil and gas projects. We do have to go through stringent environmental rules and regulations. So what I would suggest, while the world is weaning itself off oil and gas over the next number of decades. I think Stephen Harper said we'd be off oil and gas in Canada by 2100. So even a conservative thinks that the time is coming relatively soon. Why not get it, and why not use in Canada the oil and gas that goes through stringent environmental rules and regulations? So I'm a big champion of Newfoundland and Labrador oil and gas. For that regard, I do agree we need to wean ourselves off, and you know, Newfoundland and Labrador in its you know, there's 97% clean energy because of the amount of hydro that we have. So it's very interesting.
And our oil is clean too. Our oil has some of the lowest carbon overhead that there is. It's not so much a dichotomy in my mind, and I don't see a contradiction. Newfoundland shutting down its offshore oil industry would not affect global demand. We have clean oil, and that demand would be replaced by dirtier places that you mentioned with less environmental regulations. And didn't we just spend $11 billion completely greening our electricity infrastructure? I mean, the rest of the country is running coal, they're running old oil plants. We're here, we've spent all this money on clean power, and you know what's going to hit us in the pocketbook. And why don't we feel good about that?
I think the piece that's missing for me is, because I take the points about our oil is cleaner, our oil is you know, safer and all that kind of stuff. What I don't see, and I'm sure there's stuff going on, but I don't know if the public sees it, is all this revenue that's coming in from oil. Why are we not investing it in what comes next?
That's right. Sure.
Why can't we use that to be leaders in the 22nd century on this kind of technology? Why aren't we thinking about that?
I love it. We'll talk more about this, but for now, back to you, Jace.
Thank you very much, Donnie and panel. So this is a really good transition, kind of a good segue. I want to introduce you to a personal friend and a very intelligent man, Mr. Brandon Copeland. Brandon, thanks for coming out. So you're an entrepreneur. You're around the Board of Trade. You've spent some time in climate change and sustainable changes across some issues that we have here in our province. And you also have some thoughts on voter reform. So just having had that conversation then, we were talking about oil, and a lot of people are of the opinion that if anything saves our province, it's going to be oil and gas. Is that a short-term solution? Do you have something that you think might be a longer conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So my opinion going into this election as a voter, as a young voter, you know, climate change is a significant issue, and I don't think you're going to talk to many people, certainly my demographic, who don't see climate change as a major issue. You know, the debate as to whether or not it's caused by humans, caused by our society, I think that debate's over. It's now a question of how do we deal with it. And often one of the proposed solutions is, oh, we got to, you know, cut out oil and gas. Our economy and the country's economy is very, very tied to our natural resources. And I don't think you can just flick a switch tomorrow and, you know, end that. I don't think that's reasonable. I think that could be economically problematic. I've always been a big fan of changing how we produce energy, changing how we do things so that we don't need that demand anymore, right? We reduce the demand by altering. So one of the big things that I was involved with last year was a proposal for off-grid communities in the north to transition from kind of diesel power generation to renewable power generation. You have a lot of aged infrastructure in northern communities, whether it's Labrador or Iqaluit or wherever, and this infrastructure, we proposed an opportunity to transition to, wind farms, solar, things like that make sense. Our proposal was backed by batteries, but you see both economic savings and you get away from that dirty production. So by, changing the way we think about how we're producing our energy, the decrease in, drilling will happen over time simply because we're changing what we need, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So insightful thoughts there, and interesting that you had put so much research into something like that, not necessarily speaking directly about our own province, not necessarily, but definitely it feels like that theme of taking something that's isolated and finding a cleaner way to run it. I mean, that doesn't only apply to environmentalism.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Like we've got a lot of rural communities where a lot of money gets spent.
Yeah.
So obviously a completely different topic. But do you have thoughts around that? There's a similar theory.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, just I guess taking it back, it's an infrastructure conversation, I think, and I think when we're looking at Canada, whether it's our rural communities or it's anywhere in the country, what we're talking about is an investment in proper infrastructure. So on the climate change or on the environment side, one thing that we don't have in Newfoundland and Labrador would be like charging stations across the province, which kind of helps people transition into a renewable solution. But in our rural communities, a lot of new technology can help with medicine when you start talking about investing in infrastructure that perhaps allows doctors to converse with people online, investing, and that would be the investment in the wireless infrastructure, stuff like that. So I think a lot of the challenges that we face with proper infrastructure investment can help us solve some of these challenges.
So one quick question before we go back to our panel and hear what they have to say to elaborate on some of these points. Your thoughts on our local representation party-wise, needing to align with our federal representation in order to communicate these things, in order to get the kind of, because there's a lot of infrastructure oftentimes means money.
Yes.
So there's money that's going to have, or all the time means money. There's money that's going to have to come down from somebody red or somebody blue to our
I like that you said someone red or somebody blue.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's
quite likely.
Right,
yeah.
to our province here.
Yeah.
And do you think that's important, that there's an alignment there in order to get some of the infrastructure that we need?
Yeah. I mean, of course it's important. I mean, Newfoundland has 7 ridings, right? Like we are not big in a country that has 338 ridings. So certainly, if we are in a position, and we saw it, one election ago or 2 elections ago, where Newfoundland was entirely red and the government was conservative government, and Newfoundland hurt in that regard. So we need representation in the government, and whether that's a minority, a majority, a coalition, whatever it ends up being, if we don't have MPs that are communicating with the people who are making the decisions, of course it's going to hurt the province. So
makes sense to me. Thank you very much, Brandon Copeland. Donnie, panel, what do we have to say about that?
So much to say. I mean, it's hard to keep track of it all, boys, right? Listen, you really shook me with your 2100 being off the oil and gas, We'll have a patch on our arm, will we? I mean, tell me more about that, because I find it was not a discussion that I heard a lot in the public square, provincially speaking, that's for sure.
No, it's not something that, I think, you look around the world, places like Germany are looking to, go off fossil fuels. You have, major companies like Volvo saying they're not going to produce a gasoline engine or diesel engine by 2030. And so, the shift is coming. And I think, like Craig says, we should be investing more with the money that we have from oil in creating these new technologies. Offshore wind also, I think there's some huge technology improvements in that. Before there used to be concern that our wind was good and dense, but it blew too strongly. But I think now they can regulate that a little bit more. So we have a lot of opportunities here. The provincial government used to promote Newfoundland and Labrador as an energy warehouse. It still is, and it still is for wind and for hydroelectricity. And we also happen to have some oil and gas reserves as well that the technology that we're using to extract that oil is having spin-off businesses as well. You know, there's a company now that is doing, you know, used to help drill subsea wells and do and search the bottom of the ocean. Now they're doing that for other projects. You have companies like Rudder, which got their start in the oil and gas sector, and now have black boxes on ships and the like all over the world. So we need to see more companies like that taking the technology, and I hope the Ocean Supercluster helps make that happen in the coming years.
I think Brandon made a really key point where he talked about technology can help solve some of these things. And I think we're at a crucial point where the technology that we need for a lot of this stuff has arrived. It used to be, you know, when microwaves first came out, and they're like $800, and one person in town had one. Well, that's where we are with a lot of this energy technology now. It has moved. The microwaves are $20 now. And I just saw a piece on a incinerator in Denmark where they're burning garbage. It's clean. Whatever's coming out of it, the effluent is clean. They're generating electricity. They're generating heat, and they have a ski hill on it. Yeah. They built a ski hill on it. I mean, the world has moved, and we need to catch up with that.
And it's amazing to mention that, and it's great to talk about these new technologies. But Denmark, Germany, the places you're comparing to, have open electricity markets where you can ship power.
Right.
And Muskrat Falls was hindered by a lack of a national approach to our electricity market. So we had to enter into these small deals. And now you talk about offshore wind, and you know we're fully electrified here now. Any excess power, we have a single contract with Nova Scotia. Upper Churchill's on the horizon. So we want to shift. We've got major groundwork to do to open markets. And you know, are we going to have the representatives here that are going to fight with the Liberal government or whoever the government is going to be to make sure that that market is open to us to get the power through Quebec to Ontario?
Exactly. That's kind of the national policy that we need to see in this country. Most of our electricity right across this country goes north-south, but there's a need east-west, and so we need a power grid that goes east-west. And you know, Ontario is still looking to get off a lot of their dirty coal. You know, Gull Island has that opportunity to be able to do that, but we have to be able to get it through Quebec. We are supposed to be one big happy country, and moving our resources across the country, I think that's one of the issues that is polarizing Canada right now, from electricity to pipelines for natural gas and oil.
And it's a basic political question. Yeah. Can the political system sort that out so that everybody wins?
And a frustration is that, here we are, have a trade agreement with Europe, with the 21 countries that are part of Europe. We can do more trade with them than we can do across this country.
And we're not building a tunnel there. It's just not happening.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I don't think we can afford that.
It's interesting to see how things are going to shape up across the country tonight after the election, especially in Alberta, which has brought so much wealth to Newfoundland and Labrador. What are your thoughts?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. It's funny how it doesn't translate. So many Newfoundlanders live there and vote Conservative there, and then they come back home, and it doesn't seem to resonate.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the number of Newfoundlanders, I mean, I think it was high as 20,000 Newfoundlanders used to commute back and forth to Alberta. And, they make their money out there and they come back. We used to have charter planes that would leave from Stephenville and St. John's to go to Fort McMurray. And a lot of that has slipped away in the last 5-10 years.
And I'll tell you, it's not all roses and sunshine with that kind of model of economic development either. It has a lot of impact on families. It has a tremendous impact on communities and the social capital, the ability of that community to run itself. So, and it's boom and bust. It's boom and bust with a long plane ride in between.
Thank you guys so much. We'll turn it back over to Jason for now.
So I think the majority of what was just said in that conversation, I had to write it down. It was so poignant. The world has moved, and we need to catch up to it. I grew up in a family where Dad was back and forth to Alberta a lot. It is not easy, but it has brought a lot of wealth to our province. Speaking of things moving on, we have at Jack Harris HQ, our good friend here, Mitch Drydack, is hanging out and is going to have a conversation with MHA, Mr. Jim Dinn. Mitchell, how are you, sir?
We're coming here in a sec. What? We're coming here in a sec. No problem. Yep. Hey there, Jason. So I'm here at the NDP headquarters with Mr. Jim Din, the MHA of St. John Central. How's it going tonight there, Jim?
A lot of excitement here, a lot of hope that we're going to see somewhat of a repeat of the provincial election, and with any luck, we'll end up with at least in the St. John's two NDP candidates in federally. And I'm joined here with with our leader Alison Coffin, and I'm sure with our MHA in Labrador West, Jordan Brown. So pretty exciting evening for sure.
Oh yeah, well honestly the tension here is coming about to be palpable.
Yeah.
And I know that you're saying you were canvassing there with your fellow, party members. How did you find that the reception in St. John's was, leading up to the election?
I have to say that certainly a lot of very positive reaction, not only to Jagmeet Singh, and I think the more people meet Jagmeet, the more people more they get to know him, the more they like him. They also like the message he's put forward. Certainly, when you look at the debates, came out with a very positive, a very unifying message about a true vision for the country. And certainly going door to door, we encountered a very positive attitude towards the new Democratic Party, not only provincially but federally as well.
Yeah. That is fantastic. Honestly, I know 2015 was a little bit of an upset for you guys. How does it feel kind of being on the up and up again?
I think it's we're sort of seeing a resurgence of that orange wave, but I think what this country needs too, and what the province needs, is politics to be done differently, to be done more collaboratively, to be working towards solutions so that ordinary Canadians have the services that they need. We've heard an awful lot at the door from people that are dealing with poverty, with housing, seniors who are wondering how they're going to make ends meet, dental care, things that will make life more affordable, and ideas that are really put forward by the new Democratic Party about changing, not spending more, but how do we spend differently so that we invest in our people.
Yes, for sure. Well, that's awesome to hear that it's coming along for you guys. I'm really excited to see the results for tonight, and thanks for having a little bit of chat with us there, Jim.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Very much, Mitch, and of course, MHA, the Honourable Mr. Jim Din. Now, speaking of honourable people, conversation here with a very intelligent, very dapper friend of mine, Mr. Daniel James Patrick Meads. Dan, you're a social advocate. You're a poverty reduction specialist. You've spent some time in the political climate yourself, not necessarily locally, though. You spent some time living in Alberta and working with a brand that Alberta hasn't always necessarily loved, but spent some time on the side of recently. So your thoughts on, let's start with key important topics in this current federal election.
Yeah, I mean, the concern for me and sort of the overarching theme was the lack of key important topics in this overall federal election. I felt like every time I turned on the TV, someone was trying to sell me a $20 tax cut. And I kept waiting for the 39-year-old silly haircutted runner tax break, and it just never came. I felt like that was the type of things we were talking about, were these little tiny boutique tax cuts, and nobody was selling a vision for the country that I could really hear and think about and talk to my friends and family about. And that was the story of this election, is I think, 30 million Canadians sitting down, tuning in every night and waiting to hear what the story was, and waiting to hear what our country can expect out of these leaders, and not coming up with very much in most of the cases. And so it's really sad to, it's election day. I'm really excited. I took my 4.5-year-old to vote. It was great. And I still I'll be tuning in. I can't wait to see what happens. And I'm not sure what the result is going to be meaningfully different one way or the other. The second thing that I think is really important to me as a progressive guy is that it looks like about 32% of Canadians are really supportive of the Conservative Party. And yet, even with that relatively little support, they're in a real chance of governing. And I wonder what that says about our system and our country when, if we look at polling on issue to issue to issue, we see that the things that traditionally the Conservative Party stand for poll relatively low, and so does the support for the party, but because of the structural system that we have, they're still in real contention for a minority, or potentially, who knows, right? Polls are so foolish these days, a majority government for all we know yet at this stage. And so those are the two sort of big overarching things that I keep thinking about, is that, we're pretty fractured And yet, if you look at major issues, there's lots of consensus around a ton of issues in Canadian life and among Canadians, and yet that consensus doesn't translate into the current party and electoral system that we have.
Not the first time, I suppose, I've heard a similar statement. And the thing that I lead to, of course, here at Rogers TV, we think very much about the lives we live locally. That's obviously a really big national issue. I mean, it's arguable that it'll have a huge impact locally one way or another, whatever happens here, or do you agree completely?
It's hard to say. And so when we look at sort of the big pillars that the Liberal government has been talking about over its last 4 years, many of them I think are great, right? And so Reaching Home, which is the national housing strategy that's been recently rebranded, had a great investment in infrastructure throughout Newfoundland and Labrador and had a great impact on a lot of lives. The Liberals have been traveling around the country talking about hundreds of thousands of people lifted out of poverty. That stat is true in lots of the country and not at all true here in Newfoundland and Labrador as best we can tell. And so
now, if it's okay, I'd just like to add in there. I mean, recently, obviously preparing for the conversations we're going to have this evening, I came across some data that suggested that in infrastructure investments over the last 4 years of we'll say the Trudeau government, we've received about 4 times more money than we would have in the previous 4 to 8 years. And it's gone. I mean, we still have a Trans-Canada Highway. We still have some things that are federally funded. But you're saying from, I guess, as a social activist, on your side of things, you're seeing less of that from a federal government than...
No, I'm seeing more of that capital investment. And so we have for sure seen some infrastructure investment on the social side, specifically around housing. That money tends to be transferred through the province directly to projects here. What I haven't seen are the poverty reduction strategies that we've seen work elsewhere in the country haven't been as effective here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We've got some economic factors happening here that I'm sure we'll be talking about all night around the increased cost of living and the de facto increase in the poverty line here in Newfoundland and Labrador through some really regressive taxation over the last 4 years and 6 years that have caused some people to have a lot of trouble making ends meet. And so some of those national strategies that have had positive impacts elsewhere haven't done as great a job here in Newfoundland and Labrador because in lots of cases we've had further to go to get people up to that poverty line.
Is that what it is? We've got further to go. We're further, the people who were, like, to be crass about it, the people that were in the hole were in a deeper hole?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so we understand why that is, of course, right? When we have tax on literally everything. So, there's 2 types of taxes, to be really crude about it. There's progressive taxes and regressive taxes. Progressive taxes tend to tax people that have more money more and tend to tax people that have less money less. And when we put a flat tax on things like gasoline or insurance or the cost to get your license renewed or any of those things, those are regressive taxes because it hits everybody the same no matter how much money is in your bank account or how much you make each year.
Which means it could hit me way harder than it hits you because as a percentage of my disposable income, it's a lot bigger impact on my family's life than necessarily on yours.
That's exactly right. And so then when the feds came in and tried to do some really good poverty reduction work, some of which was great, some of which wasn't as great, even though it had positive impacts in lots of places and some positive impacts here in Newfoundland and Labrador, think of poverty as a binary number. Either you're poor or you're not poor, and the vast majority of people in Newfoundland and Labrador who were poor before these policies still are.
So you know what? The world does exist in black and white. Like I am of that mindset to a degree, and I mean, if you spend a lot of time in the gray and you're trying to get your head around that, maybe you don't clearly understand the thing that you're trying to get your head around because things are a little more black and white. So to say that's poignant, Dan.
So let's talk about the social outcomes of being poor versus not poor very quickly, because it is a binary thing. If you live below the poverty line, your education, health, and justice outcomes are worse. If you live above the poverty line, in those 3 areas specifically, your outcomes are better. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that if your outcomes are worse in those 3 areas, education, healthcare, and justice, that tends to cost the taxpayer a ton more in service delivery. And so what we want to do is find ways to bring people above the poverty line, saving that money downstream, also increasing their quality of life, their sense of dignity, self-respect, and their ability to participate in their communities. That's what we're talking about when we say poverty is binary. If you're below the poverty line, you have those negative outcomes, and if you're above it, you tend not to.
I mean, it would be far be it for me to disagree with you. I think everything you're seeing makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, I don't know why we're not voting for Dan Means in this election. Dan, thank you very much, sir. Donnie, back to yourself and your similarly educated panel on your comments on said conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm with you. Let's get Dan in there immediately. You know, guys, I want to ask a question, and Craig, I'll ask you to lead the reply. PCs have increased their numbers provincially, but where are the high-profile CPC candidates?
I think it goes back to the point Josh made early on, that long tail of the ABC campaign. Politics in Newfoundland and Labrador, I think, is still very much a family sport. And you're in because your father was in or your mother was in, and your uncles were in, your family was in. And I think what we're seeing here is circling the wagons around the Newfoundland and Labrador Progressive Conservative Party, and anything we can do to distance ourselves from the other ones that only have one C, in their name, then we're going to do it. And there's a lot of rebuilding that has to happen there. It's
there definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, they had a bit of a surge provincially, and yet they can't cross that divide when it comes to federal seats.
I think it's reflected in the leader too. Like, you didn't get the quality of candidates because really good candidates only join a race when they think there's a good shot to win. Which I think you can also look at the people who ran against Scheer, and some of your heavy hitters in the Conservative Party, your Peter MacKay, Rana Ambrose, they held back. And I think that's reflected in the province here. If this seat, St. John's East, was winnable, or Avalon was really winnable, I think you would have seen a very contested nomination. I just think people felt it wasn't time yet.
I still think there's a disconnect between the Conservative Party of Canada and the Progressive Conservative Party of Newfoundland and Labrador, and they don't appear to have the ties, and I think that has been a challenge across the entire country. And, you even look into Ontario, where the Progressive Conservative Party, led by Doug Ford, Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party of Canada didn't want to have anything to do with them, and it was something that the Liberals certainly tried to create as a wedge issue. So you need to have that provincial infrastructure to help build it up to the federal level. And here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the Progressive Conservatives are trying to rebuild themselves at the provincial level. They grew, I think, to 15 seats. They doubled their amount in the last provincial election, but they still don't have that ties to the federal party, and that's going to be a challenge, I think.
And a lot of that comes down to the local people who work on the committees, the riding associations, who get the local vote out and that sort of thing. They are attached to, philosophically and emotionally to the PC Party of Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know the attachment is there to the Conservative Party of Canada.
And they're literally different parties. The IT infrastructure is different. We live in an age of voter identification, and how important that is down here in the tech field. The Liberal Party provincially did very well off the federal data from Trudeau. They have a lot of access to high quality, expensive databases like a giant corporation, and then the PC Party and the Conservative Party are just disassociated.
But we talk about, candidates of notoriety or name recognition, but you look at Bonavista Bjorn Trinity there, and Sharon Vokey has been nipping at Sherns Rogers' heels there all evening, and I think Rogers has about 500 vote lead right now, but still, that is an impressive turnout for Ms. Vokey there.
Absolutely.
We'll look forward to turning over the results as they come into you guys watching at home, but for now, back to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Donnie and panel. And as you just spit the words results out of your face, we have some for you. We have some people who have been elected. First things first, let's go straight to Scott Sims HQ, where there's some bustle going on.
Very proud of the way she thought about it and then went out and did it. And I've been so overwhelmed with the support the last 4 years, the people in this room, that she's inspired volunteers to come out.
Okay, so maybe the bustle in Scott Sims HQ is not the bustle that we wanted to send you off to, but that's perfectly fine. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back in a little bit.
Hey!
The lift wasn't working and he was in pain, so I tried to lift him on my own. Yes, it's bad. I'll need help.
Can I help you with that?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Welcome to The Experience, O'Reilly's Irish Newfoundland Pub. A place to meet your friends, have a bite, and move your feet to live music every night. A rollicking good time that will dance in your heart for years to come.
Hi, I'm Peter Halley.
And I'm Kathy Hicks.
And we are here in the very beautiful Masonic Theatre, which is home to us at Spirit of Newfoundland Productions.
It's a theater in need of protection, so we have established a restoration fund.
Spirit of Newfoundland is a proud sponsor of RogersTV.
When my legs get stronger, I want to play basketball, volleyball, I want to run. I was sick when I was a little baby. I had meningitis.
Even after they did the amputations, they said that it was likely he would not make it.
To now, you throw him on that bike and off he goes.
My bike helps me get my legs stronger.
Without the war amps, being able to afford his limbs and devices would be difficult.
Thank you for helping me get around.
And welcome back to the local results. We have some more people who have been winning. Of course, we'll get to Scott Sims in a little while. Coady Hutchings also elected. Let's see what our panel has to say about this.
So guys, we're watching that screen bubble up and we're seeing those neck and necks. Well, some colors, not so much others. Nancy, what are your thoughts on it all so far?
Well, I'm interested. We haven't seen much from St. John's East right now, so it makes it interesting. You know, we're about an hour since the polls have closed, so you would think we'd be starting to get some results there. So that one is kind of fascinating to me. The riding on Buren Peninsula with Sharon's Rogers, I think he's going to pull it out. But Sharon Vokey has certainly been there with him all along. So it's and you know she's not well known in the province, so it's interesting. Also, even on the west coast there, Coady has just got elected, but the Conservative candidate close to 2,000 votes right now. So you know not. You know, when you look at some of the polling, it was showing, a runaway for some of these Liberal candidates, but I don't think it's as clear a runaway as some people expected.
ABC no more, perhaps.
Well, speaking of which, guys, I want to ask you a question. What are the implications for Newfoundland and Labrador in case of minority? What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, it depends on who's in charge of the minority. If it's a Conservative minority, then we'll get a lot of power because it looks the lay of the board there, unless Sharon Vokey can do it in Bonavista area, then it's unlikely that they're going to have a seat here, which means that they're going to want to get seats. When you see these numbers, if you're a Conservative strategist, you're going to say, wow, I wish we'd have put more energy on the ground. If it's a Liberal minority, I mean, they're in minority territory now. We haven't seen a lot of push on the ground. We haven't seen a lot of announcements. I don't think it will change our position a ton, but they'll definitely, maybe our 7 seats could count for something.
It'll be interesting if it's a Conservative minority, and it doesn't appear as if we'll elect Conservatives. So you're going to want to have a Newfoundlander or Labradorian as represented in the cabinet. So will they go to a senator for that? That will be interesting to see which senator they'll pick or how they'll choose. If there is a Liberal NDP minority coalition government that comes about, and we should elect Jack Harris in St. John's East, and you have 6 other Liberal MPs, I think maybe we're in a pretty good place then for making sure that our voice is well heard in Ottawa.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in a minority situation, if it's a Liberal minority, for example, and we have a majority of Liberal seats that are won here, I think that does bode well for us, because in that kind of situation, every member on the Liberal side is critical, not just for votes in the House, but for votes on committee, representing at committees. There's all kinds of stuff that happens under the surface on the Hill that isn't in question period. Question period is quite literally the tip of the iceberg. It's such a small part of the system. There's so much more that goes on. And in swing areas. I mean, if that's what starts to happen here, if Jack Harris were to win, if the Conservatives, or the PCs, sorry, were to do a little better here than people expected, well then those red seats are very, very important all of a sudden, and keeping those people involved is very important to the machine of the party.
Thank you so much. Jason, back to you.
Thank you very much, Donnie. Thank you very much. Good insight from the panel, as always. What are they having their insight on? Well, some results. On the Long Range Mountains, Coady Hutchings, she has been called as winner, so congratulations to Coady. Josh comes in. I mean, I don't want to say we're not calling the regatta here, a little bit less so. I don't know. You guys can have a chat about this as we get through if this is what you're expecting. This is the one in St. John's East that everyone has been talking about between Jack Harris and Nick Whalen. I mean, I think this is a little bit tighter. Well, maybe not tighter than people expected, because we really thought that this would be a snug race. This is the one that is of the most interest to a lot of us. St. John's South, Mount Pearl, Seamus O'Regan with, I won't say a hefty lead over Anne Marie Annison. But I mean, the Conservatives not having as much pull in that riding as maybe some people would have expected. As we move on across our province a little bit further, on the Avalon, Ken McDonald, 500 vote lead over Matthew Chapman, and a little bit less support for the NDP and the Green Party out there. Of course, Ken, not his first time running in an election. And as we move on into some of our other ridings, appears as though we may have a little bit of a hold up there. Okay, here we go. Bonavista, Buren, Trinity, Churns, Rogers, of course, with a 800-ish vote lead. I mean, only 110 of 260 polls closing. Oh, immediate update there. Well, we're still about that 800-point lead. Sharon Vokey with a strong. They've been neck and neck all throughout this campaign. Again, a little bit less support from some of our other parties. Scott Sims, of course, has already been declared as a winner, and Costa Bay's Central Northern Dame. So Alex Brackey with a strong showing there, but not quite enough to pull it down. And those are the results that we have here. And now, of course, Coady Hutchings in the Long Range Mountains has been declared the winner for her party. And we have a speech from her as she accepted that you can watch right now.
Whoa. Friends, thank you all so much. And you know what? Thank you all for choosing Forward, because that's, oh, did I just turn that off? Yes, I did. Well, thank you for choosing Forward, because you know what? That's exactly what we're doing. And you know what? I've really got to thank the people of the Long Range Mountains. It's been an exciting ride, like David said, for 4 years. The last 40 days has shown us how the hard work that we've done for 4 years pays off, and people are giving us that mandate to go forward again. And I've really got to thank my incredible volunteers, my campaign team. I couldn't do it without you. My supporters. They've just been truly amazing. We've got volunteers out tonight, you know, knocking on doors and getting people to the polls all throughout the riding. I think we've got 19 or 20 different groups working hard, as everybody is in this room. And that really gives me the strength to know that we're going to do this again for another 4 years. It's truly a blessing. It's a privilege, it's an honor to be represented in the House of Commons, and I'm just looking so forward to getting through the next few hours and then getting back to work for you in Ottawa. I really have to also thank the other candidates for putting their names forward. Public life isn't easy. The challenge of an election is challenging, and I want to thank all the candidates for putting their names out as well. And let's just get it done. Let's just get it done for the next 4 years. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Let's have some fun. Thanks, Dave. Yes.
Do you know, there is something to be said for a politician who doesn't have the guff and the fanciness and just wants to say, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done. Panel, to you.
I just want to say goody for goody. You know, I just want to get it out there because someone was thinking it. Was it just me? I don't know. Thank you so much, guys. You're really there for me. I'm going to make it hard for you now after the break. But until then, I'm going to lob one at you. When it comes to campaigning, you know, we all say we hate dirty politics and we all hate the negative campaigns. And yet in the 11th hour, we're leaning in for the mudsling. What does that say about us, Craig?
It terrifies me because I'm starting to worry. Do we have this mythology built up about Canada You remember Avis and Hertz and rental cars, and Avis always had this tagline, "We try harder." We're number 2, so we try harder. Is that Canada? Is that really our brand, that we're the nice guys, that we're the progressive ones? But in fact, it's just a brand, and underneath, we're just nasty, and we can't wait to see somebody fall. We can't wait to see you step on that banana peel and go down, right? And it worries me because what we've seen in other countries, some very similar to ours, is that it leads to a real division within your society, within your population. It becomes a very us versus them kind of thing, because nobody's interested in policy anymore. They're interested in, can we catch you doing something bad? Or can we put a bad picture of you on the internet? And everybody loses their mind. And man, we are sliding down that slope fast. And these parties wouldn't be using these ads if they didn't work, right? Why are they working?
Well, can we not wonder if it is the influence of our south of the border counterparts who are well adverse and well used, I suppose I should say, to using those types of tactics? And some of the ads I saw leading into the election, I was actually disappointed at some of the campaign tactics that were being used by parties such as the NDP, who we would be surprised years ago to see engaging in such negative ads.
It's everyone.
I agree.
Yeah, I share your disappointment, and just myself personally, I looked for someone who's going to give us hope and that paints a vision of the country and how we can bring the country together. And I think, as we watch what's happening to our neighbors in the South and how polarized things are and how they can just continue to focus on how they can tear each other apart, I would hope that we would learn something from that. And it is disappointing to see these negative ads and the attacks that are coming out. I don't think this is what Canadians really want, but maybe this is what wins elections. But I don't necessarily think that's what who we are or who we should aspire to be.
It's the price of sensation, Josh. What do you think?
But we had the sunny ways in 2015. We had that election, and what did we get out of it? We got SNC-Lavalin, we got bigger deficits, and I would say that in a lot of ways, the vision that was sold there, which was excellent at the time, which Canadians bought into, they've now lost faith with that. And while we say that the elections are dirty now, they've always been dirty, And I know we compare ourselves to our southern neighbor. I assume we're talking about Joe Biden, but there are some issues down there, no doubt. But our politics has been dirty. We talked about John Crosbie earlier. We talked about the Rat Pack and Brian Tobin. Those guys were at each other. And now maybe it's in our face from social media, but I don't think it's going away, and I don't necessarily think it's bad. I mean, sometimes you do have to. It is a tussle in there, but a little bit more decorum would be nice.
They were going after each other on big, important public policy issues, NAFTA, right? That kind of stuff. It was arguments about policy, and Sunny Ways, which I'm sorry is just. I still don't understand how that caught on. That is the worst tagline in the history of marketing. But that was just a speech. That was a nasty campaign. So no, it's not new. But man, with social media and the way things are spreading so quickly now, and it's feeding something darker.
It's amplified.
Yeah.
Well, one of the phenomena that we saw, and I was reading an article just recently about, so Trudeau came in and rode a big wave and was very popular. He was way up here, and he was going to have to fall, much like Obama after his first term. He came in with the audacity of hope and the great vision and all. And after 4 years, when you're not able to deliver on everything that you promised, you are going to come down. And so, from what I understand, that the Liberals tried to mirror themselves. How much we know we're going to lose so much, and we know we had to defend so much, but can we do it enough to hold on to power and get and so we're not as bad as these other guys seem to be. The mantra that they were using.
Thank you guys so much, Jason. It's back to you.
Thank you very much for your commentary. And there's a couple of things that are said in that conversation that I find of personal interest. That being said, or of course those conversations being that our politics may have always been a little darker than we would have liked them to be. It's just that without the ability to see that so transparently through these social media platforms, maybe we didn't know. And that brings about some more things that I personally find interesting in this election that I'd like to toss off to you, Donnie and panel. So I mean, if you look at things on a very gross scale, a very crude way of looking at it, you have left and right, you have fiscally oriented and socially oriented. And if we look at the problems that we have in our province right now, I mean, Dan Meads as a social activist may disagree, but I think the majority of us would say that our biggest current problems are fiscal and not social. So, I mean, as we see some of our results coming in now, we're leaning a little more red voter than we do have some blue. So of course, Coady Hutchings has been elected in through the Long Range Mountains, and I mean, by the look of the numbers coming in here, I don't know if she was super surprised by that. Nobody declared in St. John's East, which is one that everybody's looking at, but my goodness, those numbers between Jack Harris and Nick Whalen are close as everybody expected. Of course, the comment was made earlier, did Nick get in on the coattails of Mr. Justin Trudeau last time? Or Nick is a smart man, he's a very educated man. Seamus O'Regan has been announced as winner in St. John's South, Mount Pearl. That's where I was voting earlier today, as all good Canadians and good Newfoundland and Labradorians voted, not necessarily for Seamus, but in their own riding. So congratulations goes out to him. And on the Avalon, Ken McDonald with the Liberals says also results are in. He is your representative on the Avalon. So Ken, of course, not his first time around, and all the voters out through CBS and CBN, and that's, I mean, clearly what they wanted, and here they have it. So elsewhere across our 7 ridings in Bonavista, Burin, Trinity, another Liberal win, Churns-Rogers. A little, well, not quite as heavy-handed as some people may have expected. Sharon Vokey, of course. This has been, I don't know, not one of the more exciting, but as we said, in a little bit of a snorer of a campaign race, this is one, you know, that was a little bit closer. Scott Sims, of course, as we have mentioned, on the Costa Bay Central Notre Dame, has been elected. So congratulations go out to Liberal Mr. Scott Sims. And in our remaining ridings, Yvonne Jones has also been elected up in Labrador. And of course, that one relatively tight, but tight is a little bit different when you only have 90 polls. 1,000 votes is a lot when you only have 90 polls. So off to our panel to discuss, but before we do so, you know what, I'll get to that later. Donnie and friends, we have some results. What do you think?
Guys, I'm going to hand it over to you. How are these results feeling to you? And maybe I'll lead you even further as to say that if the province does end up going largely Liberal, and yet in the country we end up with more PC and NDP, what does that look like for us?
That's interesting, isn't it? I was glad to see Jack, what looks like Jack's going to take it, because I don't want to see a sweep. I don't think seven Liberal MPs, as important as they could be in a minority, is any better than 6, and Jack is very competent. I'm glad to see that. I was glad to see the Conservative Party do a little better outside the Avalon. They're coming up. Some surprising ones. Coady Hutchings, I joked before that they would count her ballots by weighing them. Well, that was a lot closer than we thought. And in Labrador, Yvonne Jones, she did very, very well, but she's faced a lot of criticism lately over some Indigenous land claims in the Labrador Ferry. So you're starting to see these real things resonate, and when you're in power, when you're the government, no matter how well liked you are, you start to wear some of this. So I'm glad to see a little bit of a shifting, more unbalanced landscape. 1 NDP seat, 6 Liberal seats. I mean, it could be good for us.
One of the things I see as interesting is the Greens, and I look at the District of Avalon, which, you know, Greg Malone with a bit of a star candidate, and he came very close to winning a St. John's riding provincially a number of years ago. And you know, that still they didn't capture a huge percentage of the vote there. So, and with the, you know, the emphasis on climate and the youth and their interest in that, so I thought that may have resonated in a few more. And I know that it's still early with the number of the polls, but you know, they're in some polls we haven't even cracked 100 with them. So I found that interesting.
And it's so early days for them in our political world. You know, we don't have a fast-moving, dynamic political structure here. It takes a while to break in. It took a long time for the NDP to break in. So I'm not entirely surprised by that.
Conservative Party is still trying to break in here.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we just see that Jack has been elected.
Jack's been declared.
Jack's been
Wow.
Wow, look
That's
at that.
fantastic, actually. He ran a good campaign. I'm very glad to see him back in politics, and it's nice to have a separate party represented.
So guys, I'll ask you, there's four corners of the bed here, right? There's the candidate, there's the party, there's the leader, and there's the issues that matter. So when it comes to your flavor of voting, what rules?
Oh, that's very interesting. Well, as a voter, are we in the bed?
I'm under the bed, actually, waiting for it to all be over.
Yeah, I'm very happy with what's happened here today. I got to say, I wish the campaign was a little bit more based on vision, like you're saying. There's some annoying pieces around some of the tax, what did someone say, what did someone do 15, 20 years ago. But all in all, I think Newfoundland and Labrador, it showed that we have a much more balanced electorate now, and it bodes well for the future.
I think, to your point about, do we vote for the leader, do we vote for the candidate, do we vote for the policy? I vote for the policy, but I'm a weirdo, and I don't mind saying that. It's back to the conversation we had earlier about sort of the negative ads, and are we riffing off of what's happening in the U.S., where you very much vote for an office. You vote for the President of the United States, as well as all the other seats that in the House of Representatives and Congress and that sort of thing. Here, I can't tell you how many times people ask me, who are you voting for Prime Minister? Nobody. I'm not voting for anybody for Prime Minister. That's not how it works. And I worry a little bit because is it a real sort of lack of understanding of how the system works? Right. Or are people just assuming that it's the Prime Minister that drives all the policy? And that one kind of scares me the most. People can learn how the system works. But if we're at a point where the leader of the party really does dominate the direction and the policy of the party, then we're starting to slide away from the way the system was originally meant to work. And maybe that's what people want, but that's not how it's supposed to work.
I think it's back to the point of sensation. What do you think, Nancy?
Well, I think there certainly is a strong focus on the leaders, where the leaders are today.
Sure.
And so it drives what their announcements are that particular day. And so you might feel a little lonely being a candidate in your riding, because the whole national campaign, the focus is on the leaders and what they're doing. So it kind of drives. So I could see why people would get confused and wonder, are we voting for a Prime Minister, or who are the candidates in my local riding?
Yeah.
I think there are methods whereby there's lots of social groups, including ours at the Board of Trade, who held a debate and partnered with Rogers to get that broadcast so many more people could see it. But that didn't necessarily happen in every single riding, so it still tends to be that focus on the national leaders.
Yeah, that was a great initiative and a great partnership. And now we'll turn it right back over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Donnie. Of course, we'll review your results for you, where you know who has won every riding here in our province. Seamus O'Regan has been declared in for another term in St. John's South, Mount Pearl. A bit of a handed win for him. I don't know if anybody expected any differently. On the Avalon, Ken McDonald out in CBS. A friendly guy, met him once. What a fellow, great smile, good handshake. I support Ken McDonald having been elected. And as we move a little bit further on down to have a look at some more of your results, some more of your MPs. In Bonavista, Buren, Trinity, Churns Rogers has come in a very even 7,000 votes after 145 polls. That seems very, very clean, very easy. I'm not going to say it's suspicious. I'm not going to say it's suspicious, but it's a pretty round number. Costa Bay, Central, Notre Dame. Scott Sims, of course, has been elected. He's been awarded that riding. So Mr. Scott Sims is your MP if Costa Bay, Central, Notre Dame is where you are voting. A little further up north to our good friends in the Big Land. Yvonne Jones up in Labrador has come in with a Liberal victory. So 6 Liberals. So far we've got one NDP, one orange man with great hair. We'll get to him shortly. In the Long Range Mountains, of course, Coady Hutchings, one of the first people who were declared elected as MP in this 2019 federal election. And in St. John's East, here it is. This is the one that everybody was having a look for. and we missed it there real quick. But Mr. Jack Harris, back into politics. He is your MP in St. John's East. I guess, that's the most interesting one. We have 6 Liberals, we have 1 NDP, we have lots of conversations about whether or not that is what our province needed in this federal election or not, how we feel about that, and we will have those conversations right after this break.
All right, girls.
Mom, you said it's played again.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Welcome to the experience, O'Reilly's Irish Newfoundland Pub, a place to meet your friends, have a bite, and move your feet to live music every night. A rollicking good time that will dance in your heart for years to come.
Spirit of Newfoundland has been delivering laughter, love, music, and magic.
From our all-star cast and crew, bringing you the best dining and entertainment experience all year round.
Spirit of Newfoundland.
Proud sponsors of RogersTV.
And welcome back to the local results. I am your host, Jason Piercey. So here tonight on this election night, we have elected in our 7 MPs, all 7 ridings, 6 Liberal, 1 NDP, not a whole lot of blue. So to our panel, how do we feel about this? Is this what we needed? Some people argue that Newfoundland and Labrador has a fiscal issue right now. Should we have been a little more right-wing? Donnie?
Good thinking there, buddy. So, Craig, I'll let you lead off. What are your thoughts on how blue is showing up tonight?
Not sure I'd equate blue with fiscal responsibility right at the top, just to make that point clear right away.
Yeah.
History doesn't really show that all the time. I am surprised, though, pleasantly surprised, I don't have a particular horse in this race, but at the numbers that we're seeing for Conservative candidates, especially off the Avalon. I want to see competitive politics. And I didn't think it was going to be as competitive as it is. I mean, there's no blue seats, but those numbers are bigger than I expected. Some of these races are a lot closer than I expected.
Yeah, and we opened off the the coverage today, and we talked about where are the star candidates. Well, I think I look at these numbers, and I think there's going to be quite a few running for the Conservatives next time. And the voting numbers are good, too, to your earlier point. So we've seen a big turnout, so that tells me there's an energized base. I mean, if you were down in Bonavista, I mean, next time you'd have a surf clam fundraiser. They'd be eating surf clams and champagne tonight if they'd beat that. And that looks to me like it could have been a winnable seat. I mean, if you went back and if you'd had maybe Scheer wouldn't move the needle, but you put more people on the ground, maybe more resources in the district, I think they'd had it more or less written off. That was winnable.
Interesting point, though, in St. John South Mount Pearl, that the NDP are in second place there. That riding had been held by Ryan Cleary with the NDP previously to Seamus. And so it appears to still be a fairly strong base for the NDP. And you go back to the strongholds of that's mostly the John Crosby riding. That was he won 80-90%. So St. John's was known for so long, east and west, to be so strong Tory blue. And now it's so to see the surge of the NDP in the St. John's East riding and a good solid second in St. John's South Mount Pearl.
Yeah. Let's zoom out from, the blue moment and talk about general surprises and vibes that you're feeling so far tonight. What are your thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
I'm surprised. One of the things I'm surprised at, and this, it relates back to the blue thing. St. John's East is a lot closer overall. That's not just two people, or wasn't, two people vying for the top. That was a three-way race going on there. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that. As we get farther down into the polls, it's going to broaden out. But the early days of it or the early stages of it were a bit of a surprise to me.
Definitely one NDP seat in the city is not so much a surprise, but as you mentioned, the second seat really surprised me. Seamus had some issues that came out. He couldn't campaign early on. I think he got really frightened in the polls, and he got out there, but the NDP still did well. And the NDP did well off the Avalon as well. I was very surprised. Well, not very surprised. I'd expected, but I didn't expect the volume of blue votes in Avalon District, in the Burgeo, in the Bonavista area district. We've changed names so many times. And in Central, Grand Falls, as I still call it, Costa Bays and all that. Great showing. So I think, it's just a groundswell of people that are saying no to the Liberal Party. It hasn't cost them yet, but I think the groundwork is there.
To me, St. John's East is the strength of Jack Harris's. Right now, I know it's still early, but he has about 1,000 vote lead right now, and it was such a close race the last time. And we now have him declared elected, and we don't have all the polls back in. So it's he won by Nick Whalen won by 600 votes the last time. Now that being said, Jack did pull about 70% of it the time before. So maybe the people of St. John's East tried the red team, and now they're going back to the orange one.
Yeah, I think before we get too caught up in what's happening, is there a blue groundswell and that sort of thing, there's all Liberal seats except one NDP seat. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The Liberals elected almost their entire slate. That's right. So job done, except for one. Let's move on. I think one of the things that might be interesting, I'm always fascinated by what's happening underneath, as I said earlier, and that disconnect that we were talking about between, and is there one, between the PC Party of Newfoundland and Labrador, the worker bees who make things happen, and the Conservative Party. And is this an indication that the local teams finally came to bear and did the work for the candidates? Or is this more an indication that people find Andrew Scheer more palatable than we thought?
It's interesting, Scheer only spent about an hour in the province, in St. John's East, during the entire campaign. Not that the other leaders were here any great deal either, but makes you kind of wonder that star candidates or another visit by the leader, what that might have done.
It could happen sooner than we think if there's a minority government.
True.
And it's true you bring it up, actually, and so I'll turn it over to you. I mean, when it comes to Scheer, let's talk about some missed opportunities. Do you have a lens on that?
He had a lot of missed opportunities. I thought, the whole Trudeau makeup debacle, whatever you want to call it, that came out. He didn't really capitalize on that. I thought that was the moment where Jagmeet Singh stood up and just looked like a leader. He handled it correctly. I think Scheer went on the attack there when he didn't need to. The gay marriage debate, which is completely settled in the Canadian voters' mind. There's no time for it. No one cares. It went through the court. No one's interested in this at all. It's a non-issue. He comes out and he says, they pull up the footage from 2005, and he says, look, we're not going to go forward with it. It was a personal opinion, still is, kind of thing. That's more or less where Trudeau's at, but he didn't message it right. He didn't come out and say, I've evolved. It was a huge opportunity for that. I mean, he left people think that he still has an issue there. And, it's one of the key bedposts there, that leadership piece. People vote and associate with the leader, and they want someone who's open-minded and progressive. And I don't think there's a lot of play in Canada for social, conservatism. People are fiscally conservative, but I think that was a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, and we referenced the whole blackface, brownface matter that came up, and it was rumored that the Liberals had a whole treasure trove of attacks that they were going to put against Conservative candidates. That completely neutralized that then. But then, Mr. Scheer didn't come off, as Lily White in the end with his, was he an
Is that
insurance
right, Blue?
broker?
Yeah.
Was he an insurance broker or was he not?
Yeah.
He turned out to be, had dual citizenship and was in the process of reneging his American citizenship.
Yeah.
So both of the, they kind of neutralized each other in that neither one of them were as advertised.
And I'd love to see the influence, I'd love to know the influence that Mr. Singh had on local candidates here, because through all of this, he was the one who came out more leadership-y in my mind, you know? He had some really difficult things to deal with, a lot of which was captured on video and went viral, and handled it with grace and intelligence. He did fabulously in the debates, and of all the leaders, he seemed to be the one that didn't get ruffled, didn't get thrown off course, and people like that kind of stability. I think that really played well here.
And Singh can play this. He's a man about the country. He spent some time in school here in Newfoundland. He's representing
Grand Falls, Windsor.
Grand Falls,
Shout out to the
Shout
Dove.
out, throwing it back.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Dove.
But his riding is in Burnaby, BC. I mean, he crisscrosses the entire nation. And Craig points out, the encounter with the gentleman in Quebec about, you should take off your turban and shave your beard, and how he handled that. That showed poise. It showed leadership, and I think we'll see how the polls come out tonight, and if they reward him for that.
We will. Until then, it's back to Jason for more.
Thank you very much, Donnie. Speaking of course, federal NDP leader Mr. Singh, and him spending some time here locally. Also a guest on Out of the Fog at one point in time. I did not see Justin Trudeau or Mr. Andrew Scheer on Out of the Fog. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll have a whole lot more to talk about when we come back.
The lift wasn't working and he was in pain, so I tried to lift him on my own. Yes, it's bad. I'll need help.
Can I help you with that?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Welcome to The Experience, O'Reilly's Irish Newfoundland Pub. A place to meet your friends, have a bite, and move your feet to live music every night. A rollicking good time that will dance in your heart for years to come.
Hi, I'm Peter Halley.
And I'm Kathy Hicks.
And we are here in the very beautiful Masonic Theatre, which is home to us at Spirit of Newfoundland Productions.
It's a theater in need of protection, so we have established a restoration fund.
Spirit of Newfoundland is a proud sponsor of RogersTV.
Marijuana is the most common drug found among teen driving fatalities in Canada.
Hey, gotta go. I love you. Bye. Bye, sweetheart.
Feeling in my fingertips.
Emily?
Yeah, these words are ready to leave my lips.
It's hard to talk about the dangers of driving high. We can help at thecallthatcomesafter.com.
And welcome back to the local results on Rogers TV. I'm your host, Jason Piercey. So we're going to head back over to our panel and Donnie Coady to talk about what's going on here today. Of course, all 7 ridings have been announced, have been elected, 6 Liberal, 1 NDP, that being the coveted St. John's East race between now current NDP Jack Harris and Mr. Nick Whalen of the Liberals. Donnie?
Thank you so much. I want to just lift it up for a moment. And yes, we're seeing an NDP resurgence happening here in the province, but it didn't really translate into strong federal candidates. Craig, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that one, I can't really put my finger on that, but you're right. I mean, we had Jack, who I think from all measurement is a star candidate and clearly did his job well. But there was a lot of people saying, oh, I don't know that name. You know, I think I met him. I think I met her. I'm not sure. So I think that I'm not sure what if there's a disconnect between the federal party and the provincial party. I I think in the provincial party case, there was a very dynamic leader who pulled some people in her wake, and maybe the infrastructure wasn't there to expand that to a federal campaign. I don't know. Because as I said before, so much of this is won in the riding associations and by the people who are doing all that, making the phone calls and getting the vote out and that sort of thing. But it will be very interesting to see, we got one elected, but man, we got a lot that are in strong thirds or second place for NDP. If that's happening here, what's going to happen as we move across the country where the NDP has a stronger base, much stronger than they have here?
Yeah, I think Craig is right there. I mean, the NDP provincially has seen some strong infrastructure in the St. John's area and in Labrador West, and it hasn't manifested itself, but they're showing some very strong numbers for the amount of infrastructure that they have. I mean, they do rely on the provincial base to help them carry their way through. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a trend that's going to go right across the country tonight.
Yeah. They still remain an urban party here in Newfoundland. I mean, the last NDP who got elected outside the Avalon provincially or federally is Chris Mitchellmore, and he's a Liberal now. So, they don't have a lot of infrastructure outside. The trend in the Conservative and the NDP, the results are coming in. I'd love to sit down with my laptop and do it historic, but my feeling is that you're seeing a little bit of a surgence in the orange and blue, and a little bit of maybe apathy, lower turnout amongst the Liberal voters. If that carries for Justin Trudeau to maintain government, he needs to win Atlantic Canada. He's going to lose 30, 35 seats of the bloc. That's a given. He could lose 45, but if he loses 30, if he wins the GTA, if he does well there and he does well in BC, he can hold on. Yeah. There's 50, 60 seats on tight margin in the GTA. If he holds those regions, he's fine. If this trend continues and Atlantic Canada is weak, then that could not bode well for Southern Ontario, and all of a sudden he's in a weak minority position, or potentially he's lost his government.
Guys, let's talk about the bloc.
We get one in Newfoundland, don't we?
I think we can all connect the dots to impact of popularity and growth in the power of the bloc. Nancy, what are your thoughts?
Well, they seem to come out of nowhere. But and the other interesting phenomenon that's happening in Canada in general, in each of the provinces, is the surge of new political parties. Now, the bloc is not new. But the government in Quebec is now, I think it's a CAC or CAQ. I'm not exactly sure what the acronym is for it. But it's a totally new party. The Liberals are totally wiped out in Quebec and at the provincial level. And I guess you're seeing that manifest itself now at the federal level. And there's been this resurgence in the bloc, and watching the bloc leader in the debates. I mean, it was almost laughable about how much everything was about Quebec, and it was amazing. We're a nation, and the Indigenous people are in the nation, and the English people are a nation, and it was just so strong. But I also am concerned about undertones, with Bill C-21 in Quebec, and the language in their communications about talking about people who look like us and people who are from Quebec. And that kind of scares me, and I hope that is not going to be the tone that's going to come from there. But it's amazing how, now we'll see if it manifests itself tonight. I mean, what the opinion polls are and what happens on election night can be two different things.
And that runs against one of the most diverse group of candidates across that we've ever seen, right? More women running for office than ever, more diverse, more new Canadians running. So they're at a step.
Yeah. It's also, to me, the resurgence of the bloc, it comes at an interesting time when we had this brief discussion earlier about what's happening out west. And there's a real move towards, what do you want to call it, like Alberta nationalism or whatever. Would we be better off on our own? We've been feeding this country long enough, let's feed ourselves, sort of thing. And I think you're seeing some of that play out between BC and Alberta over pipelines and that sort of thing. And we're getting these sort of intransigent positions that are very regional. BC is a thing when it comes to that stuff. Alberta is a thing. Quebec is a thing. How long before somebody in Alberta is looking at the resurgence of the bloc and thinking, now, there's an idea. Why don't we do something like that?
The bloc de petrol.
And where do they draw from? right?
That's
Who are
right.
Who are they siphoning off of to get that support?
And I think the frustration in Alberta and even Saskatchewan with the government in Ottawa. I've even heard groups talking about forming a new country of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Alaska. Alaska too is also frustrated with its relationship with Washington. So as the country, and this is a big country to bring together in distance, and to bring everybody together with shared values, and so it's going to be really fascinating to see. Which, as Josh pointed out, if Atlantic Canada is kind of a red. Orange, you've got Quebec with a surge of the bloc, how Ontario will play out, but then as you get into the prairies, turning more blue, and I think that British Columbia is certainly going to be a very interesting, and we'll be up quite late tonight, I think, to get the results.
It'll be a different thing for BC. Normally in BC, you're kind of sitting there going, well, I voted, but it's already decided.
Yeah.
Now, maybe not.
Now that weed's legal, they can all vote NDP.
Yeah.
He's not just JC from the block. Jason, I'm trying to be funny and get your attention. I want you to ask a question and we'll weigh back in on it.
Yes. I do have a question that I'd like to throw off to the panel if that's the case. If you're okay with that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm listening intently, hearing a lot of things being said about the sort of idealistic or however possible or interesting it is about an Alberta sort of separation or a bloc pétrole, if you will. Is some of the resurgence of conservative voting across our province in this particular federal election, how much of that do you think that we can contribute to the transient population here that finds himself working in oil and gas in the lovely province of Alberta?
That's a really good question.
That's a great one.
I would say that definitely there is a concern amongst people in rural Newfoundland and Labrador, and all throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, that think that the carbon tax could hinder the Alberta economy and that would directly impact their lifestyle. And that messaging hasn't been used here, but people know it, and it hits them right in the pocketbook. And there's a big concern that the just taxing carbon, taxing oil locally while we allow imports of oil into our country untaxed could unbalance the economy, could cause real problems for Alberta. So I definitely see that resonating here in the province. I'm surprised it wasn't a bigger discussion point.
I see it. I think the same thing is happening. I agree that it's having an influence. I think I disagree slightly on how, because what I see happening is people going to Alberta, living amongst the Conservatives for the first time and realizing they're just people.
Yeah.
They're people like me. I need not fear them necessarily, and we just have a different idea about the way the world works. And I think people can't help but pick up some of the policies, the ideas, or the ideology of a place when you live there. If you go live in Paris for a while, you start to think like a Parisian, right? Yeah. And I think we're starting to see some of that. People have been in a system where conservatism is really the strongest thing going.
And the lifestyle is great there, right? So that's the other thing. They see it as working.
As long as the oil is flowing to fund it, absolutely.
And the other thing is, campaigns matter. And as we got to know the leaders, I don't think too many Canadians knew who Scheer was or what he was like. And they got to see a bit more of his personality, and probably all what the other parties are trying to do to scare people and refer to Doug Ford or to Harper or whatever. I don't know how much of that stuck. We'll see as we move into Ontario and across the country. But we also saw how throughout the campaign, people again didn't know who Singh was, and that his approval ratings just skyrocketed the whole time. And that's another interesting feature about the focus on the leaders, because throughout this campaign, you saw Singh's favorability numbers just continue to soar. Trudeau's went down. They went down from the day that the Jody Wilson-Raybourn appeared on Parliament Hill to the hearing, and they continued to go down into unfavorable levels. And Scheer's, I don't know if they ever got completely into a positive favor, but they went up more. So it's interesting on the focus on national leaders and how we should do a comparison afterwards about how those numbers, how that reflected in the actual number of seats that they were able to.
Who do you dislike the least? I think
Yeah.
is the key question.
Welcome to politics.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I will ask as well, just to throw out, and maybe we'll come back to this again based on time, but from environmentalism to LGBTQ, we very much are entering the stage, as discussed earlier, regarding the fragmentation of how things are showing up when it comes to voting this time around. What do we see for the future in terms of trending in this regard?
Well, good question, because Canada has only grown its population because of immigration in the last 20 years or more. In Toronto, there's more people who have not been born in Toronto or Ontario who live there now than ever before. So we're seeing this surge in immigration coming to Canada. And we desperately need it because we have a rapidly aging population. We have more people set to retire than enter the labor force. So I'm kind of surprised that is not more of a topic or an issue or things that we need to talk about. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we talk about the fiscal issues, but I think our population, you can't grow an economy unless you have people, and we're the only province in the country that is expected to have its population decline. And I'm kind of disappointed that didn't become a bigger issue. The demographic challenges that we're facing as a country, the costs that they're going to put on health care, the costs that the challenges that municipalities are having now in attracting people to run for leadership.
Just running our society.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a big issue in the provincial election, and it wasn't a big issue in the federal election. But one of the points I think you raised there early, Donnie, is around that idea of fragmentation. We talked about the bloc and the fragmentation potentially of regional parties and that sort of thing. What I'm starting to see is fragmentation of the fragmentation. So people used to talk about special interest groups.
Right.
The Board of Trade is a special interest group, and M&L is a special interest group. And everybody was kind of comfortable with that. Everybody kind of knew where everybody was, right? These people are in favor of lower taxes and more efficiency. These people are in favor of more public investment, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not sure how it started to happen. I know social media had something to do with it. But what I'm seeing now is in a lot of these well-established communities, communities based on diversity, LGBTQ, any number of these communities, they're starting to fragment into more and more specialized viewpoints. I mean, if there's 35 million people in Canada, there's 35 million special interest groups now, right? Everybody has a particular, very specific view on how the world should work, and if you can't answer their questions, you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And I will say there's a parallel to be drawn to business as well. No longer, as we know, are we trusting the blind institutional faith in big banner organizations. We are value-based and trust-based and people buy from people-based. And so we're seeing the same trend politically speaking as we're discussing tonight, which I find to be fascinating. And yet it does speak to questions about the future of voting based on these fragments that are becoming more and more as the subjects and the parties and the empowerment within these communities grows more and more. Nancy, to make it crisp for the people watching at home this evening, what is the Board of Trade's stance on immigration as it pertains to our local province in Newfoundland and Labrador?
We are huge advocates of immigration, arguing that there should be at least 5,000 people brought to this province every single year. That is a bare minimum. That will just keep us at status quo. And I watch with interest stories about, I think, a long-term care facility in Lewisport that was struggling. Well, that's struggling because of people and not having enough people to be able, yes, there might be some management policies or the like that are not working perfectly, but really what it comes down to is there are not enough people to work in those jobs. And it's the number one issue that our members in the Board of Trade now are facing, and we're talking, the vast majority of my members are small businesses, and they cannot find the talent that they need. And so we are huge proponents of immigration and trying to demystify the concerns that people have, like immigrants steal our jobs. They definitely do not. They create more jobs. And, you know, I know of a restaurant that was unable to get cooks. When they were able to get the cooks and the chefs to work there, about 25 Newfoundlanders got a job as a result. So, you know, immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs. They're risk takers. In Prince Edward Island, our sister chamber in Charlottetown takes busloads of people around and says, this business is for sale because of the succession planning. We have about 70% of businesses are expecting to lose their leadership in the next 10 years, their manager or their owner or whatever, because of retirements. So we need more immigrants to come in and take over their businesses, and that's what they're doing in PEI.
Thank you so much. As a tech entrepreneur and educator at two of our major educational institutions, what are you seeing in day-to-day, and how does that affect your lens on the province and the voting that we're seeing tonight?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. And to Nancy's point, I completely agree with the need for immigration. You're seeing MUN and the college specifically expanding internationally. I know that the college this year has taken in a ton of international students. They've opened up multiple classes in the programs. We can use our education system to feed it in. From the tech entrepreneur side, we do not have enough programmers. We do not have enough technical people. We have massive companies that are earning a lot of revenue, and you know, we're doing business all throughout North America. We're bringing money into here through web services, through online businesses, and we don't have the people. So I agree with you. Back to the bigger point of the issue voting, you know, it used to be the few wedge issues were unions versus taxes, and then it was abortion. But now you're starting to see single issue voters. You're starting to see people say climate change matters, immigration matters. I want a Canada I can believe in. I'm not concerned at all. I see a new style of millennial conservative that just cares about their own place in this technologically driven world and not about who someone marries or where someone came from. They don't care about that. So that's why the lack of proportional representation was disappointing to me, because I'd love to see what that would bring out. But all in all, it is an interesting mix that we're seeing here tonight. I think if we had proportional representation, I think you'd see a very interesting government. But there's definitely, I mean, the Canadian voters are ready for change. They're ready to discuss these issues, and we need a political system that empowers that.
Thank you so much. For now, back to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Donnie and panel. Tons of insight on what's going on across our country. We're going to have a look at some of our impending, or what it looks like things are shaping up for across the country. So 18 seats elected for the Liberals, 3 for the Conservatives, 1 for the NDP. Of course, that 1 for the NDP is our very own Jack Harris. Obviously, we are on the eastern side of this country. It is a long day and a lot of time zone changes before we start to see those numbers climb on some of those other colors, especially as you head out west to the Prairies and to Alberta, where the Conservatives are expected to have a really, really big lead. Now, speaking of that one orange seat, where we have a correspondent who is out in Jack Harris's HQ. We're waiting for him to show up. We expect him to have some things to say, and when he gets there, we will toss to Mitch, and he'll be able to cover some of that for us. Now, let's review what's going on across our own province. Of course, more polls have closed in the long-range mountains. Coady, of course, was declared quite some time ago. It only looks like her lead has climbed since then. I don't think anybody is super surprised about that, and that's why she was declared early. Jack Harris, of course, so far the lone NDP candidate to have been elected as MP across the country. We'll get more of those perhaps through Nova Scotia. In St. John's South Mount Pearl, Seamus O'Regan in for another term. I personally think he did all right last time. I interviewed him a couple of times for Out of the Fog, so I would have voted for him too. Kenneth MacDonald, a Liberal out across the Avalon. He's pulling through. I mean, pretty still consistent if you look at it as a percentage, as a ratio. Matthew Chapman is holding in there pretty well, and I think that says something about some of the conversations that our panel has been saying with the resurgence of the Conservatives across Newfoundland, especially outside of the major centres. In Bonavista, Beer and Trinity, I mean, this is a closer race now than it was when Rogers was declared. So I don't know if this is one, I mean, 1,000 votes-ish, and we're looking at a recount. I mean, this is one that we're going to want to pay attention to as those remaining 20 polls close. I mean, that's a lot tighter than it was when Rogers was declared elected. So we are definitely going to keep our eye on this one. Coast of Bays, Central, Notre Dame, Scott Sims, and a handed lead still. But, I mean, I'm not expecting the same kind of conservative resurgence here as we did in our previous slide here, but that's a little tighter than it was the last time we were around. And with only 20 polls left to close, there might be something interesting to be said there. So, to Labrador, Yvonne Jones, only 1,000 votes, but 1,000 is a lot more when you only have 90 polls. And again, in the Long Range Mountains, here's Coady. So that is a cycle through everything that we have seen results-wise across our province, our 7 ridings, and of course what we're seeing so far on a national level with our party leaders. So on that national level, Donnie, you and your panel, what do we have to say about that?
Good cue. Who wants to lead, guys?
Well, it's interesting to see, you know, the Greens are about 8.7% of the popular vote, and for most of the candidates here in Newfoundland, Labrador, they've now all reached about 1,000 votes. So I think that is an improvement for them over the previous elections. But we get back to proportional representation, and, you know, climate change, if you think, you know, if you ask, I think most people what they thought that the biggest issue was of the campaign, it was climate. And the Greens certainly, you know, peg their stake on that particular issue. But as strong as, you know, an 8 or 10% popular vote, it doesn't necessarily resonate into seats. So it's, you know, maybe we should be having a proportional representation system. So it's interesting because we'll see how that goes right across the country tonight. You know, I think that it's projected that they, you know, Elizabeth May will grab her seat and maybe one other. We'll also see how Prince Edward Island will turn out, because Prince Edward Island's provincially had a very strong Green Party turnout. I was speaking with the candidates in the Green Party, and they told me that the reaction at the door this year compared to 2015 was a paradigm shift, that there was a lot of interest in what they had to say. Now, we know people are polite at the door, but, you know, they certainly have has shown a stronger showing here tonight.
That green vote, that CO2 kind of wedge issue that we talked about, that's really resonating. What I find interesting about the surgence of Conservative votes as the polls are going on, it depends on how the polls are counted, but in a lot of cases that change could be indicate that they were very good on the advance polling and get out the vote, and that the general tide is a little better for Conservative, because that advance ballot tends to reflect a lot of groundwork, and the Liberals have the funds for that.
And it's also, you know, part of this is an incumbent never does as well, right? This is a government that came in on a huge could not be maintained, and this is just the natural result of that. You know, Josh said earlier, when you're governing, you have to make decisions, and sometimes you're going to make decisions that your supporters don't like, or a lot of your supporters don't like, and that's happened to this government several times now. They've had 4 years of having to deal with that, so a lot of what we're seeing here is simply, you know, the house is settling.
Right? What's that old political saying, governments are like diapers and they have to be changed every now and then for the same reason?
Yes.
It will be interesting to see, though, as we watch the popular vote, and the Liberals are about 42%, and the Conservatives at 30%, and, you know, the polls right up across the country had them neck and neck. So I know we're still only in Atlantic Canada here yet, but it will be interesting. I was talking with a pollster who does a lot of polls in Atlantic Canada, and it was, you know, the Liberals swept Atlantic Canada in the last federal election in 2015, and it was suspected that they could lose up as many as 12 seats in Atlantic Canada. Wow. So not seeing it right now. There's 21 they're leading in 21, so we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you so much. Let's turn it right back to our boy, Jason Piercey.
Thank you, Donnie, and I'm going to really quickly send this straight back out, as our good friend Mitch is at Jack Harris's HQ in St. John's East, but he doesn't have Jack Harris just yet. We have provincial NDP leader Alison Coffin. To you, Mitch.
Hey there, Jason and Donnie. I'm here with Alison Coffin at the Geo Center here on Signal Hill, the leader of the provincial NDP. How you doing tonight, Alison?
Doing very well tonight.
Good stuff. Honestly, it was a little bit of a nail biter there for a bit, but Jagmeet pulled through, and so did, you know, so did Jack Harris.
Very well.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a great campaign. We've seen him do great work. I've been knocking on a lot of doors in the district. Very well received. People are happy that Jack is back. This is excellent news for us.
Yes, for sure. Well, I do know that Jack has been the MP for St. John's a couple times in the past.
That he has.
And honestly, I do imagine that it's great to see him back. How do you feel on, the provincial level, having Jagmeet one step closer maybe to federal leadership?
Oh, this is just excellent news. Certainly, Jagmeet has ran an excellent campaign. He was very direct. He was very clear. People began to embrace the message. And I think we're going to see this build momentum as it moves its way across the country.
Fantastic. Well, honestly, I'm really looking forward to see how it turns out. Do you have anything else to say there, Allison?
Well, I did have the opportunity to meet with Jagmeet while I was at the CUPE convention a little while ago.
Beautiful.
We had a chance to walk and chat. I pointed out a number of the key issues that are important to Newfoundland and Labrador, and we talked a little bit about what a minority government might look like and how we could manage that.
Yes, and I know, we were chatting just now about what Newfoundlanders are really looking for in a politician, and I know that you mentioned you didn't want to step into federal politics just yet because you feel like Newfoundland kind of needs someone. How do you feel about, Harris's view for Newfoundland here in St. John's?
Well, I think Jack Harris is an excellent person to represent the province. Certainly, he was actually the leader of the New Democrats a little while ago as well, before he entered federal politics. So he knows what Newfoundland and Labrador very, very well, and I'm sure he's going to be an excellent representative for us.
That is awesome to hear, Allison. Thanks again. We're here with Allison Coffin, the leader of the provincial NDP party. Really appreciate your time there.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. And then back to you, Jason and Donnie in the studio.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. A lot more to be said here on the local results. We'll be right back after this break.
All right, girls.
Mom, you said it's played again.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Welcome to the experience, O'Reilly's Irish Newfoundland Pub, a place to meet your friends, have a bite, and move your feet to live music every night. A rollicking good time that will dance in your heart for years to come.
Spirit of Newfoundland has been delivering laughter, love, music, and magic.
From our all-star cast and crew, bringing you the best dining and entertainment experience all year round.
Spirit of Newfoundland.
Proud sponsors of RogersTV.
When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is put on my yarn.
Jaylen's been able to have the prosthetics and have the support that she needs because of the people who donate to the RMs.
My aunt helps me to pick flowers.
She can do things on her own. She doesn't need someone else to do it for her.
I love all the pretty colors of flowers, but yellow's my favorite color.
Welcome back to the local results on RogersTV. I'm your host, Jason Piercey. So, off to our panel for a little more discussion. I have a question. I'm looking at the popular vote here, Donnie and friends, and we see in the popular vote, the Liberals hovering a little over 41%, 40-ish, the PCs somewhere just under 30, and the NDP 15, 16, 17, back and forth a little bit. I mean, you do the math on that. Is that adding up to a trend that leads towards an effective majority government for the Liberals, given, I mean, Mr. Singh flat outright said, we ain't going to hang out with the Conservatives?
That's great, Jason. I'll turn it over to you guys. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't project Atlantic Canada too far. We went completely red last time. If anything, the Liberals are going to lose probably anywhere from 5 to 7 seats. So if they lose those seats out of the 28 or so, then they've already lost that much ground. Then they're going into Quebec, where we know they're losing at least 35 to the bloc. That's 40 plus seats. Then they're going into Southern Ontario. If they don't do well there, they're in minority government situation, if not worse. So if anything, I would look at this trend as to say Atlantic Canada, which was a complete lock for them, has broken. So I don't know. I wouldn't say a lot of Liberals are excited by the idea of only having 20 or 21 seats in Atlantic Canada.
But your question with respect to popular vote, I mean, if they're going to hold 41%, you know, that's pretty strong. You know, and the polls beforehand had the Conservatives and the Liberals neck and neck. However, Atlantic Canada is pretty small. You know, 32 seats in the whole of the 338 in the country. So we'll have to see how this trend pulls out. And there's a lot of polarization, as we know, right across the country. So.
And I'm an economist, so I'm never going to give you a straight answer. It can be one or the other. It was beaten out of me in school. But Atlantic Canada is not the rest of Canada.
It is not.
Right? We vote differently for different reasons. There was different issues here. Can't predict a heck of a lot about what's happening across the rest of the country based on what's happening here, except the point that Josh made, that it was a stronghold, man. Like, they didn't just win all the seats, they won all the seats in a massive way. So something has snapped there. Whatever that is could reverberate across the country, or could be causing other issues across the country.
Yeah, if you're in the Conservative war room, wherever that is, you're looking at this and you're saying that's 3 or 4 or 5 seats that we never would have thought we would have gotten. Yeah. So that's already in the bank. I mean, they haven't spent a ton of time in Atlantic Canada. So now you're thinking, ooh, are those plus or minus 3 points in Southern Ontario and the GTA where there's 50 seats up for grabs? Are we going to see this trend? Are they going to close in our favor? And is there actually a minority/majority potential for the Conservatives? Who knows?
And if we end up with a minority government, that's not a strong minority government.
Exactly.
Or a coalition, that's not a strong coalition. All that has to play into Andrew Scheer's strategy for what am I doing a year from now or 18 months from now. You know, gauge the population. Are they ready for another election? Do we go back and try this again? Is there a non-confidence vote?
Yeah, and on that note there, Craig, I think this election, no matter what comes out of it, the shine's been taken off Trudeau. Last election, this unbeatable politician who literally, you know, he came in a bit of destiny there. He's, you know, very much had even better looks and a better stage presence and better makeup maybe than his father. But he came in and he just swept the place. And no one thought he'd be beatable. No one thought he'd be a one-term leader. And now here we are. Even if he wins this, the shine's off him.
Yeah, and you know, he came from 3rd place in the last election to you know, take to grab a majority, and you know, leading up to the 2015 election, we were thinking minority then as well, and I think we were all a bit surprised at how strong the Liberal majority was. So you know, the night is still young in this country.
And the test for him is the next 4 years, assuming he forms government.
Yes.
His legacy won't be what he did in the first 4 years. His legacy will be what he did in this 4 years. And even I'm speaking of, you know, do you vote for the Prime Minister or do you vote for the party?
Right.
We're talking about one person here, right? But that's the thing. The proof is in this pudding. These next 4 years, not the first 4.
Yeah, and if he does,
what can you do with a minority? Yeah,
what does he do? And if he gets in there and he has another 4 years, if you can find a way to balance out a minority or get a small majority, it actually might be good for him and good for the country in the sense that a lot of the mistakes that he's made have just come from hubris and just having too much control. The SNC-Lavalin, he felt untouchable. You know, he went to India, and you know, he was a little too boisterous because he just felt like it was the international papers were writing these glowing pieces. Well, now the shine's off him. Now he realized, oh God, there's a lot more to this than I thought. It might actually be really good for him.
Yeah. Guys, I want to turn this back in the final few minutes that we have tonight. Let's focus on the province from the seats that you sit in your leadership positions every day. Very powerful, very well known, all 3 of you, and I'm very thankful to have this audience with you all tonight. Craig, I'll ask you first, in your day-to-day life with municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, talk about what the results tonight say to you about the next 4 years and how that shakes out for your neck of the woods.
Well, for me, for MNL, for all of our members, it bodes very well. When our national body, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, went to the parties and said, here's the things we'd like to see you do. What are you how are you going to respond? It was, for the most part, the Liberals and the NDP that came through on a lot of policies that were pretty close to what we were looking for around funding, around a rural lens on federal policy, more flexible funding for rural municipalities, more work on affordable housing, that sort of thing. So we kind of got the best of both worlds here. We've got a very strong NDP MP. We've worked with Mr. Harris before. He's a very capable guy. And we still have the rest of them who are in government. One will be in cabinet. This is a good situation for us in terms of trying to have our little bit of 7-person influence on the Hill.
Nice one.
Yeah, I opened the night with, changes to the Tax Act was one of our biggest areas of concern, and so that's certainly something that we are going to continue to push for as we go forward. We've also been always concerned about the level of spending, both at the provincial and the federal level, and when the Liberals first ran, they hoped to balance the books by, I think, by the end of this term, or quite short thereof. Now I think it's going to be something like 2041. Same time we get Churchill Falls back. So maybe there needs to be some bringing in of a few more conservative policies there. But having a strong voice in the NDP, should they help with a coalition government, in someone in Jack Harris. You can probably expect Seamus O'Regan to go back into a federal cabinet if it should be a Liberal government. So I think that bodes well for the province and for the influence that we'll have in Ottawa.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'd echo the sentiment on having a likely person in cabinet, and that would be good. And we have some strong candidates to put forward. I'm thoroughly disappointed with the lack of discussion around Newfoundland and Labrador. We're in a financial situation where we're basically on our knees. Everybody talks about climate change. We're on our knees because we completely greened our whole electricity market. No one wants to get behind us. I got a feeling they're going to give some other provinces a little bit of money to get out of those coal plants. Meanwhile, we can't get a nickel for our hydro projects. But from a tech perspective, there's been a lack of vision there. And we're just not embracing this opportunity globally. So I would love to see something like the Labrador Tunnel was the only tangible thing that was mentioned from the government, and there was, it goes across all the parties. There wasn't a great discussion about how we can make Newfoundland and Labrador a tech or a data center or a startup haven. I would like to hear that discussion.
I'm just glad someone brought up the Labrador Tunnel. Finally, in these 11th hours, please bring it to me. Guys, what else do you think we would like to make sure that everyone watching tonight knows, and at least carries in their hearts and their minds as they move ahead and experience life now with the votes that have come in this evening on the show, at least in our province, let alone in Canada, which, as we know, is yet to shake out, which we'll do so over the hours ahead. So, Craig, I'll ask you, what should we as citizens of our province be doing in our day-to-day lives after tonight?
We should definitely be voting again the next time you have the opportunity, clearly. We talked about strategic voting earlier, and how many NDP voted Liberal to block the Conservatives. How many of these NDP who were in third or second might actually be getting a seat tonight if people weren't doing that? Right. Whether people did or not, I have no idea, but that's the part that bothers me about strategic voting. I think what people need to keep in mind is keep their feet to the fire. This is not the end of the political process. This is the beginning of the political process. These are real human beings sitting in a real office with a real phone. And you can call them, you can walk into their office and talk to them. We really need to engage. All the other stuff we do, the protests, trying to break down parts of the system, that's all good stuff. That's all necessary stuff. But you can have just as much impact by sitting these human beings down in front of you or in front of a group of you and making suggestions or demanding answers. They're not nearly as big and scary as you think they are.
For me, it's, we're all in this together, and my hope is that, and it takes all aspects of society, those that get involved in their municipalities, those that are in government, but the private sector and the community that brings about the success that we need. So, my hope is if we have a minority government, that we will work together, and we won't look to always be looking to have one-upment. Every member of Parliament takes an oath to work in the best interest of Canadians, not to work in the best interest of the Liberals or Conservatives, the New Democrats or Greens or whatever. And so I really hope that they take that to heart. And you know, I'd love to see some more open votes in Parliament, and not everything being carried by the whip and the party discipline there. But you know, maybe I'm an optimist.
I hate to interrupt here. We've got, of course, NDP recently elected on St. John's East, Mr. Jack Harris. We are going to throw off to have a listen to what he has to say, as we expect that he'll give a rousing speech about winning his St. John's East riding. So as a way to connect some audio here with what we're seeing with Mr. Jack Harris at his headquarters. I mean, as we see people bouncing around from headquarters to headquarters, and maybe we'll sort of toss this back and forth a little bit, Donnie, while we talk about it, while we wait for this audio. I mean, you got to think that Mr. Harris expected a win. I mean, this is the Geo Center. I had my wedding reception there. So, like, I mean, he's not just sitting home in his office. Like, this is planned. So Jack Harris was expecting a win. I mean, no doubt about it. He really, really thought, I'm going all in on this. And obviously, he's a legitimate politician. He's been in the game for a really long time. But this was almost a certainty for him. I mean, that's what it looks like.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I do really appreciate all of the support that I received in this campaign. It's wonderful to be able to share it with you tonight, and to give special thanks to all those who helped make it possible. You know, it's been a long election, because it took a lot of effort by a lot of people to make it happen. So, but I do want to start with a few thank yous. I just want to thank my wife and my family for their sacrifices and the support that I have received from them. It's been not been easy. It's been a lot of effort. Some out there on the doorsteps, involving signs, like my son John, knocking on doors and doing all of that. So it's all very important, and thank you for that. And of course, I want to thank the volunteers. You, the volunteers, many of you are here. It's been a tremendous help that you've provided. It's fantastic that what you've been able to do. So many of you are making the contacts, getting out the voters, knocking on the doors, putting up the signs, doing all those things that make it possible for our message to get out. And of course, most of all, I have to thank the voters of St. John's East. I'm very humbled and proud that you have given me the confidence to represent you in our democracy in Ottawa. You know, I mean, I keep saying we only have one national democratic institution in Canada. That's not the Senate. That's the House of Commons, where people who are elected go to represent the people who elect them. And that's the role that we are all going to be playing in Ottawa, thanks to you, the voters of St. John's East. And I also want to salute and congratulate my fellow NDP candidates in Newfoundland and Labrador for their efforts in the election. It was a tremendous job that you did representing our party and doing what needed to be done to ensure that our message got out and that everybody was able to participate in this election and support the great program on which we ran as New Democrats across the country. Anne-Marie Annenson is here, St. John South Mount. I don't see her. Is Leah here? Leah Mary Movell from Avalon. Great job. Matthew Cooper for Coast. Matthew Cooper was in. Bjorn Bonavista. The names are sometimes a bit confusing. Great job, Matthew. Noel Joe, Coastal Bays. Central. And Holly Pike for Long Range Mountains. And Michelin Gray did a great job in Labrador. You should all be very proud of the campaigns that you ran on behalf of our party. And I also want to congratulate Nick Whalen, Jody Wall, and David Peters. This has been I think it's fair to say that it's been a spirited campaign in St. John's East, and of course democracy is very well served when quality people put their names forward and offer to represent the people in Parliament, and they have all done that. So it's not easy to put yourself out. We may not agree on everything, and I think it does take courage to be a candidate and to engage in the process as you have done. So, you know, I think I'm very excited about this because we have had a great election with a great platform. And we've offered hope for young people, leadership, on concrete action on climate change, and a commitment to work with them and on their behalf to save the future. Hope for people who have long awaited a universal pharmacare program to get prescription drugs, not just the promises they've been receiving to date. Hope for a dental program to remove the stigma and health and life consequences of lack of proper dental care. A very important one. Relief for young people burdened with student debt and young families with overwhelming childcare costs. These are important matters that we wish to stand up for in Parliament, and I'm hoping that all across the country tonight we are going to have more New Democrats elected to bring this promise and hope to Ottawa on the opening of Parliament after we have a great victory tonight across the country. So we have a big job ahead of us. It's my honor to stand up here before you and offer to go to Ottawa to represent you in St. John's East and the people of our province. I promise to bring your voice to Ottawa and fight for the issues that matter for you at home and across the country. We are very pleased to start what I hope will be a strong momentum across the country tonight. I had a conversation with our leader, Jagmeet Singh, just about an hour ago. He's very excited about what's happened here, and he's also very excited about what's going to be happening across the country tonight. And we wait with bated breath, although I better hope it's going to be a long night because we got big battles on in BC. By the time the time zones change enough for them to finish their voting and their count. So thank you, everybody, for all of your effort, for everything that you've done to make this possible. And let's go forward to build a better country. That's what we're here for, to make life better for people and to build a better country. And we'll do it all together.
Build a better country, make life better for people, regardless of your political leniency. Maybe leniency is not the right word. Whatever way you lean, It's hard to disagree with that. Getting close to wrapping our show here this evening. Donnie, some final comments from yourself and your panel, please.
Well, I'll just turn it over to these three fine folks. I'm so glad to know you, and so glad we got a chance to hang out on TV for 2 hours tonight, and we worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about. There's 18 more notes left to go through. So I just want to thank you all, and I just want to hear some final sign-off for you. We talked about it a little bit earlier on, but just give me your final thoughts leading into how you anticipate the rest of the vote going across the country tonight.
Ooh, interesting one. Based on these trends, I think the GTA will be a lot closer than some people are thinking. Some people are saying there'd be a liberal surge. I think the polls today showed plus minus 3% in 50+ seats. And of course, the GTA, the Toronto area, decides it. It'll be interesting to see how big the block surge is based on the Liberals' weakness in Atlantic Canada, their stronghold, where they've coughed up 7 seats. I think that's scary. They could lose 40 seats of the block. And then Jack said it. BC is going to be very interesting if the NDP steals a bunch of seats from the Liberals. That could be so. We could be up real late. I don't know what we'll be drinking, but it could go either way at the end.
Yeah. One of the things I'm seeing is that more people have voted against the Liberals than have voted for. In the previous elections, Liberals were winning 50, 60, 70% of the vote. Now they're back down into the between 35, 40% range. And so that might not, that's going to manifest itself differently in the rest of the country. And so they might have been able to hold on to most of the seats here in Atlantic Canada. I'm also surprised by the margin of victory for Jack Harris. It was 600 votes the last time between him and Nick, and I don't know where the last numbers were, but it was 2,000 or 3,000 at least, or more in the last we saw. So I don't think if this trend should continue across the country. The Liberals probably are going to lose their majority.
We've talked a lot all night about resurgent Conservatives, that sort of thing. I'm really intrigued as to what's going to happen with the NDP across the country, because we saw some unexpected numbers here for them as well. A lot of these races, I wouldn't call them three-way races, but second and third had bigger numbers than anybody anticipated, and quite often the third was the NDP, and it was bigger numbers than we anticipated for them. So, as I said earlier, what's going to happen when we move into parts of the country where they've actually dug in pretty hard in the last few years? Are they going to have an unexpectedly good showing? The last polls that were done showing Jagmeet Singh increasing in popularity, we talked about it earlier. When were they done? What's happened between those last set of polls and people walking to the polling booth? And what kind of impact has he had on them?
There was a lot of tight seats in BC, so I mean, he could easily, based on this trend, from my perspective, steal a lot of seats in BC.
And
the kingmaker.
And Singh was, barely won his seat in Burnaby, and they weren't so sure he was the leader for their party, and I think that their minds are going to change. Well, we'll see how the rest of the evening goes, but they certainly have had a strong showing here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you so much, Josh, Nancy, Craig. You guys are the best. Jason, back to you.
Thank you very much, Donnie, and thank you very much, panel. It has been a pleasure working with you this evening. Your thoughts and insight far surpass what I would have given, and that's exactly why we have a panel. So, huge more thoughts to come out and thank yous. We're going to go through our ridings across the province again. Again, Goody Hutchings pulled it down pretty early, and her lead has only increased as more and more polls came in. But it is interesting to see, as our panel, our esteemed panel pointed out, the Liberals don't really have the majority of the votes anymore in some of these ridings, which is a huge, huge change. And then sometimes it means that you're voting for somebody like Nick Whalen, and sometimes it means that you're voting against somebody like Justin Trudeau. And I think that's the key takeaway for a lot of people, especially in the NDP and even in the Green Party, because we're seeing more and more Green votes now that climate change, at least locally and across the entire country, has been a really, really big portion, if not the biggest portion, if you consider oil and pipelines to fall under the the vein of climate change. So Jack Harris pulls down St. John's East. A lot of people are excited to see Mr. Harris back in politics, but I have a funny feeling that we'll hear the name Nick Whalen again one of these days. So further along, other ridings, of course, Seamus O'Regan of former television fame elected in again. I mean, this is a big NDP win here. I mean, I don't know if this is if you're looking at things from the polls up front, I mean, perhaps you would have expected a tight race between the PC and the NDP, but I mean, I don't know if it would have been that tight. So onwards and upwards as we get a little further down through the Avalon. Ken McDonald, fair lead that has only increased over Matthew Chapman as things got on. But again, I mean, look at the numbers coming out of the Green Party for Greg Malone. Now, of course, Greg Malone, I mean, it's not the first time that he's been around in politics, and maybe there's a little more of a personal brand that pushes that through than it is somebody voting for a Green Party. But nonetheless, it's nice to see competition in democracy because that's what drives actual change. And of course, up in Bonavista, Buren, and Trinity, this one shaped up to be a tighter race than I think some people expected. Sharon Vokey and Terence Rogers. The Liberals, I mean, have been declared for a while, but there's still 11 polls left there. And I mean, I know we're running really tight data when we extrapolate on these polls, but that's not 100% done yet, even though we have them declared for quite some time. You never know. Not over till it's over. There could be large ladies singing. Okay, so Coast of Bays, Central Notre Dame, Scott Sims, another one of the early declarations over Alex Brackey. I think about what people expected here. But again, the story here is not a Liberal win. It's the amount of votes for the NDP and the Conservatives, and to some degree, the Green Party. Same thing through Labrador with Yvonne Jones. 1,200 votes on 90 polls. I mean, it's significant, but the more important thing is, like, you got another 1,000, another 700 going to the NDP there, like in disparity that I don't know if everybody would have expected. So it's nice to see that competition. It means people are interested in what's happening on a federal level, and they're curious about what they're going to be able to do for their country. And that is the entire point of politics and democracy. So as we say goodnight this evening at the local results here on Rogers TV, it has been my pleasure to be your host. We have some gigantic thank yous, of course, to Mr. Donnie Coady and our esteemed panel of panelists. Really appreciate the insight that you've been able to provide, both to our audience and to me personally, as not having been a huge political aficionado prior to studying for this rather impressive gig. Thank you, Mom. I'm thinking of you. And now, huge thank yous, of course. Rogers Television oftentimes could not be possible without the help of a lot of our volunteers here in the studio. So our hearts go out to you and to our audience across the province for paying attention. It is our pleasure to serve you. And of course, to our correspondents out in the field, to Jacqueline and to Mitchell, thank you both for an excellent job this evening. And as our panel has said, your job really only just started. You voted your leaders for your ridings. Now it's time to actually hold them accountable to the reasons you voted for them. You can reach out. You can say, hey, man, hey, lady, you said you would do this thing. I'm not seeing it done. You can lean on them. That's the entire idea of picking representative. Thank you for watching the local results. My name is Jason Piercey. Have a great night.